how the US policy is changing and how this is actually reflecting the reality in European Union.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. That was really fascinating. I was traveling like 2 weeks. I was in Washington talking to State Department and congressmen. And then I was in Stanford and Berkeley could give speeches also about Europe. And of course, first point was that we realized that Europe and the United States are moving together again. Because it's one of the guys I talked to said, I'm afraid we need some marriage counseling, you know. Of course, the United States was so important for Europe, and we knew that all, and NATO was important. But there were a lot of misunderstandings. There was a lot of Russian propaganda as well. You know, whenever we said Nord Stream 2 was not a good idea, they said, you only said it because the Americans want to sell their LNG. It's not because of security in Europe, and so on and so forth. So what we talked about was, how can we have a new relationship with the United States? But of course, you are right. Another point was, I asked all the people, how about what's happening in 2 years? Will Trump come back? And nobody said no. Everybody said, of course, this is a possibility, it's a menace, whatever. And today, I read what Trump said in 2018. In 2018, he said, you know, if the Europeans don't pay more, then the Article 5 will not be, I will not use Article 5. So, and that's what we know about America. So my point is, we have to have a new relationship with the United States. And I even talked to people now in Vienna from the Marshall Plan Fund. Shouldn't we have, you know, like seminars? I was really stunned how well-informed students in Stanford and Berkeley, many Asian students who are about Europe, they asked me about neutrality. You know, Asian students ask you in Berkeley, why is Austria neutral? Very interesting. So they are very well-informed about Europe. So I come to the second point, and I dare talking about Austrian neutrality, because I want to make the point that you said it. Of course, we have to have a European, we have to be a world power, no doubt about that, because otherwise they don't take us seriously. But I think the really decisive point is, how do we explain it to the people in Europe? Is it really of an advantage of a worker, of a farmer, of a student in Europe, that Europe is stronger? Is it in interest of everybody? And I think, of course, it's in the interest of everybody. Why? Because otherwise the others will influence in a way that we do not want. So I think we have to bring much more emotion. I always tell you, when I was a young man, 1981, 25 years old, and working as an intern at the European Commission as a stagiaire. You know, the 25-year-olds around from Germany, Italy, or all over Europe, we were aware of the fact that probably our fathers were shooting each other. And this was a very, very strong emotion. But the even stronger emotion was the positive emotion, that we have the chance to build up a new Europe. And for us, no doubt about that. But as you said, in 1989, 1990, and we thought we would live in a liberal, great, wealthy Europe, and nothing can happen again. And so the decisive word now is security. How can we give security to our people? And this is also a question for Austria. We're discussing it very intensively in Austria, also in Austrian Parliament. What does the government say? They say, we are neutral, so we are secure. And I say that's not true, because we know from the Cold War that there were always the ideas, and both sides had their plans. If the one comes through the Danube Valley, the others will come as well. So neutrality never was security. And that's the reason why we need now a security union. And Austria has to be part of a security union. And we have this mutual defense, Article 42, you know that, of course. But we have to explain it to people, to give the positive emotion why this is so important for us. And then the next point, you said it, my last point, of course, China. Very interesting, I was talking to business people, the representatives of German companies in Washington, and really after 15 minutes it was only about China. And I asked them, so what's happening if there would be stronger sanctions on China, if there was any trouble with Taiwan, whatever? It's a catastrophe. Whatever German company would name, it's over, you know. A real problem with China is depression in Europe. So what do we do now? Do we say, okay, we are afraid of China, or do we say we have to form a very strong union not against China, but to explain to them that, and I always show, when I have my parliament speeches, I always show books, so this is also a recommendation, The World According to China, written by Elizabeth Economy. And I really recommend you to read this book, because that's also her last sentence. That's what they want. They want a world according to China. And no wonder why. For centuries, the world was according to China, and the Europeans were going there and tried to do trade with them, and we needed them, and we need them again. But what do? That we don't work according to China, but according to treaties we're doing with them. I don't want to dominate China, but I don't want them to dominate us. And one of the good news of this book, I also can tell you, is, of course, they have their plans. And you talked about semiconductors. They are not as good as they want to be. They had a plan that by 2020, they would be 40% independent on foreign semiconductors. They didn't reach this goal. And they still need Taiwan, which is also interesting. Without TSMC, all the production companies in China and in America would stop. Last thing, because you also talked about digitalization, there's also another book by Kai-Fu Lee about Silicon Valley versus China, about artificial intelligence. And there's one page about Europe, and the page about Europe is they are not part of that, you know. So no, they're not part of it. So the big discussion and the big fight in artificial intelligence is between China and the United States. And we don't take place. But without artificial intelligence, no future, especially no future in digitalization. So again, but where's the emotion? How can we explain it? But we have to explain it to the people. If we don't build up this united, strong security alliance in Europe, and security is more than having arms. Of course, security is on all bases. If we don't manage that, then I really don't see a future. But on the other hand, we want to be optimistic. Let's do these different points. Let's have a new friendship with the United States. Let's have a really strong European also defense union. And of course, let's talk to the Chinese, but you know, on an equal base, and explain to them, we need you, but you need us. And as long as we need each other, and as long as trade brings us together, then we will have a good future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helmut, for your initial remarks. So, you know, we started with the so-called big powers, and certainly they play a role in Western Balkans. I don't have to reiterate the role of Serbia in the region, but also the links between Serbia and Russia, and what is the role of Russia in Republika Srpska. You can tell about that to us. But at the same time, Helmut, I think, made a really clear point. We need a security union, and Wajman was always seen as a prosperity project, project of freedom, project of being part of the West, because we always wanted to be part of the West, to have our civilization back. But nowadays it became again a security issue. How do you see it from Bosnia and Herzegovina?
I'll give you a little bit of 2 sentences of my personal background. I'm obviously from Bosnia and Herzegovina, from Western Balkans, but I studied about the European Union in the United States. And then I went from the United States to UK to study abroad. And then I went back to Bosnia and then went to study to Germany. So I always kind of examined it from various different perspectives within the EU, from a country that left the EU, and then across the pond. And in my graduation thesis in the United States, I then confidently, as only a 22-year-old can write confidently, wrote that it's long-term impossible to remain a political dwarf while economic giant. And that was a very popular kind of popular statement about the EU in the United States back then. And not only as a description, but kind of as a prescription, that that's the way forward. And it seemed illogical entirely. It's like saying I'm preparing for the Olympic Games by eating healthy. I'm not exercising, but I'm eating healthy. So that discrepancy seemed like an impossible dream. And in that sense, I think this crisis is an opportunity, and I constantly reiterate it in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's an opportunity for Europe to rediscover its spine. And I think the crisis we are experiencing, it's not just a security crisis. I think it's a crisis of normative vision for the European Union. And that is, I think, the crisis that it's underlining all other crises in Europe and the perception, obviously, of Europe from the outside world. I don't know if you've ever played a game with a small child called hide and seek. And when they're very little, they have this habit of thinking that if they close their eyes and if they can't see you, that you can't see them. My son used to do that. You're looking for him and he does this and he somehow thinks that he's invisible. And I think that's what the European Union is doing in terms of problems. If we close our eyes, then the problems can't find us. And I think it's high time. It's high time to open our eyes. From the perspective of Western Balkans, I think it's not just European crisis. It's not just crisis for Europeans. I think it's even a greater crisis for those who are aspiring to join and who genuinely see Europe as the greatest peace project of all times in humankind. And we find ourselves in a paradoxical situation. I usually host students from around the world, mostly Europe, in our party. They come for study visits, they come to visit the parliament, and so on. And 10 minutes into our conversation, I find myself convincing them that Europe matters, that Europe is the future and that it's the greatest peace project of all times. Because people tend to get bogged down by minute details of, but we really hate it that Brussels does this. But for us, from the outside perspective, you can't see forest from a tree. And I think that vision of Europe from high above is necessary in these kinds of situations. More specifically, when it comes to Western Balkans, we've been warning about this for years, if not decades, of a malign Russian influence in Western Balkans. Political leader from Bosnia and Herzegovina met with Putin on 21st of December, 2021, so not even 6 months ago. They met in Moscow, closed meetings, no photos from the meeting, no statements on what was agreed. Dodik spoke to Lavrov on 27th or 28th of February, which was only days after the invasion, where in the public statement made by the Russian embassy in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they said that they followed up on the agreement reached in Moscow on 21st of December and agreed the future course of action for the implementation of that agreement. That, I think, justifiably so makes us nervous. And this idea where we are closing our eyes in front of a problem called Vučić, where both Washington and Brussels are doing their best to see him, despite all the evidence, as the stabilizing factor in the Western Balkans and a one-stop shop. I like to say that we somehow, the greatest success of Western Balkans, that we somehow managed to Balkanize the political habits of Westerners who come to Western Balkans instead of emancipating ourselves. In a sense, I feel like in order to avoid the problem, we are looking for, and when I say we, I mean Europe, we are looking for one-stop shops in Western Balkans and hoping that that might be Vučić, to press that one button who will solve all the issues in Western Balkans instead of actually creating and multiplying the problems. And that is why I will remind you that the American embassy in the first days of the invasion said they welcome Mr. Vučić's statement on Ukraine and the neutrality. Neutrality became it didn't age well, let's put it that way. So they saluted his neutrality and then within days realized, oh, wait a second, perhaps neutrality is not enough. So obviously we are looking to the elections in Slovenia, the same way we looked at the elections in Hungary and were devastated by the results. And I think, and I will finish with this, I'm a debater. I competed in a debate for many years, so my instinct is to look for things to disagree about. And in today's introduction, a statement was made that citizens of European Union don't care about bureaucracy, they only care about how it impacts their own lives. I would argue bravely dare to disagree. Latest Ipsos poll from the 19th of April shows that citizens of Europe, of all 27, actually except Hungary countries, are more than willing to sacrifice even their own personal finances for a visionary approach of the European Union towards Ukraine. Netherlands is actually on top in terms of not only recognizing that, but also willing and believing that it can afford to finance help for Ukraine, willing to accept refugees. So in a sense, we are led by citizens and not brave enough and not quick enough to be inspired by those things that citizens of the European Union want, and we are playing safe, and playing safe doesn't win battles. And in that sense, I think that we live in a strange time where citizens are more progressive than their own governments, are more visionary than their governments, are braver than their governments, and it's a challenge for liberals. I believe leaders mean to lead, not just to reflect, and not just to... I feel like the main difference is that leaders before used to believe that they should stand out. I feel like leaders now believe if I can be as subtle in those 4 years and disappear into oblivion, then the better. I think it's time for leadership. Thank you.
Absolutely, it's a great time for leadership, and it's good that European citizens are pushing the politicians to do more, to engage more, and it was a great solidarity with the citizens of Ukraine. Certainly, I'm not going to read all the comments and questions from the previous panels, although I have some notes for you prepared. I'm going to open the audience for some Q&A. Please raise your hand if you have any comment or question. Guy, I skip you in the first round, but you'll be able to answer some of the questions.
I agree completely with the conclusion.
That's
I
excellent.
spoke for both of us, so
That's excellent.
So the problem is that we have that leaders needs to become again leaders. Eh?
Exactly.
Any comments or questions from the audience? Oh, it's too early. Well, I have some. Yes, please,
There
Emil.
are two.
You want to wake up?
Yes.
Good morning to all. First, I want to greet Sabina's mother, like I want to greet my mother. And why do I say this is because we had a chat with Sabina about it. We are actually struggling because of this lack of leadership even to convince our own parents who are subject to a propaganda that is operating perfectly, to convince them that actually democracy, human rights, and European values, or the values that we share, the values of liberal democracy, are actually the answer to the challenges that we have in the region and in the continent in general. But then we get the same answer from our parents back who are not so well versed in democracy or politics, and they say, but look at Vučić, he delivers. And look at the others, they just block us. Of course, I'm Macedonian, for those of you who do not know me. And I do not know what to answer to that one. I can just give them wonderful stories, good presentations. I can refer them to you as amazing speakers who are going to sound inspiring. But in terms of delivering results, I will be having difficulties to point out to cases. How do you think we can answer this in the future?
Emil, I feel guilty because you pointed Bulgaria, but I don't feel guilty because
I didn't mention Bulgaria, not even be of Bulgaria.
Because we are good friends, and certainly, I mean, it's time to deliver. We cannot keep North Macedonia, Albania as a hostage of the unanimity rule.
The answer to that is that we need to change our attitude towards the whole question of the entrance of the Western Balkans and include and I go further and Ukraine. So we have still this attitude in the European Union to say, yeah, okay, they're gonna enter, but and then starts a whole range of arguments. What needs to be done? how much time it will take, why this is needed. Maybe we were too fast with the Eastern Balkan country, but with the Eastern European countries entering in the Union. And I'm saying, that's maybe true, but after 24th of February, let's look again to that. If we didn't have put the Eastern and Central European countries in the European Union, they would maybe today be the battlefield. Not in Ukraine, but in the Baltic states, for example. So if you look today to the enlargement of the European Union, that has been criticized, as you know, and that is used now as an argument to say not too fast in the Western Balkans. That is what is happening. I think we have to reassess everything. I think that there is an absolute need to speed up now the enlargement of the European Union for the security situation of this continent, therefore, and to stabilize again this continent, including Ukraine. And it's also needed because for the Ukrainians to win this war, they need that. They need that the fastest as possible, the Commission and the Council, hopefully in the next Council meeting in June, decide on the candidate membership status of Ukraine. They know it will take 5 years, 7 years, I don't know, but the fact that they are recognized as candidate member states is of a huge importance for everybody. For a soldier who is fighting in the Donbass, for a family who is living in Lviv, far from their home, so that they can keep the morale. It's absolutely key for them to do so. So there is a test coming on in the coming weeks. And what we have to do is to stop to say, Ukraine in the Union, will that work? And all these Ukrainians, will they not come to Europe? Or will they stay in Western Europe? Will that be, like we got with the Polish and the Romanians? Because that is the thinking in a number of capitals in Europe. And they have to get rid of it. There is another issue, far more existential on our plate. That is the future of this continent, the stability of this continent, how to stabilize it. And the way to do it is to have the Western Balkans, the fastest as possible, inside the European Union, including Ukraine. That is the purpose. And in my opinion, a key question that has to be answered, not in 5 years, in a few weeks, in June, in the next council.
I think Emil sparked a good mood in our discussion. So the topic of Western Balkans is really important, and we should deliver on Ukraine. I think they deserve a candidate status in this council, and we'll make sure that our family is united behind that. Helmut, you wanted to intervene?
I just want to add one point. When I wrote a book about Europe 1.5 years ago, I talked to a think tank in Budapest, very close to Orban. And this guy told me, Orban wants Serbia as quickly as possible within the European Union because he wants a middle European Union against the Western European Union of France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany. And of course, things change because his friendship with Poland is different now for reasons we know. But I think we really have to take care. And when on the first day of the war, a Serbian newspaper writes Ukraine attacked Russia, and we know that Vucic is behind or is controlling all the newspapers, we know there is no rule of law. So without rule of law, no entrance, and without free media, no entrance within the European community. But we have to make it clear to him and to the people in Serbia, what do you want? You want to be alone with Russia on the losing side, or you want to be within the European Union on the winning side?
We have to make clear for the citizens of Serbia, but also we have to make clear in our progress reports and to have explicit text saying that Serbia cannot sit in 2 chairs.
Right.
3
chairs, with the Chinese as well.
Yes, with the Chinese as well. Please, President of Liberal International.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for this conference, and thank you for the inspiring speeches and presentation, and also thank you for maintaining alive the spirit of Hans van Baalen through the name of this conference. Thank you so much. I'm relieved to listen to you because, yes, indeed, Europeans need a strong Europe, more efficient Europe, a Europe which of democracy and liberal democracies, etc. This is very good to listen to. The war we are living and you are living at the doors of Europe is threatening not only Ukrainian, this is tragedy, it's threatening the Europeans, but the consequences of this war are going beyond the frontiers and the borders of Europe. What I saw, as Madam said, I saw that this tragedy is giving a historical opportunity for Europe to accelerate its unity, its force, because indeed we were together with Timmy in 2018 talking about Europe defense. And that time in Berlin, I heard many Europeans say, no Europe defense. Yes, we need Europe to have a defense. I am African, I'm not European. I'm the president of Labour person, nobody is perfect. But let me give you my opinion from this angle of, how do you say that? Yes, angle of Africans and non-European, you know? While you are talking about Europe and the future of Europe, I would say the future of the world, because what I'm seeing that there is now a clear division in the world. I'm seeing that in Africa, within 1 year, we had 3 coups, military coups. I'm seeing that Putin is creating a precedent, and the strongest countries will eat the smallest one. I'm seeing that the multilateral system, all of you have stand for many years since the Second World War to build is falling down and has no efficiency, no credibility now. So while you are fighting for Europe, we want you, Europeans, and we want more stronger Europe, not only to defend the security, the sovereignty, because Le Pen is talking about sovereignty. Yes, you cannot have a sovereignty, Mrs. Le Pen, if you are not strong, and you cannot be strong on your own if you are not belonging to a stronger family. This is also an opportunity when you look at the energy dependency. We have agreed the Paris Agreement in 2015. I was vice president of the Paris Agreement. And Europe, since then, has done nothing. The CO2 emissions are increasing instead of decreasing. Europe is increasing its dependency on the Russian gas. This is the opportunity Europe should seize to switch from nice words to actions and to implement the Paris Agreement and to stop the energy dependency from Russian gas. I will tell you something. Innovation you have already in Europe. Together with Bertrand Piccard, we inventory, I don't know the word in English. Yes, we count, and 1,400 invention in Europe and innovation action to implement the Paris Agreement now. So invention and innovation, you are the continent of innovation. You need only to invest in innovation and to seize this opportunity. So will Europe seize this opportunity to implement the Paris Agreement and to fight against this biggest challenge, this biggest war we are waiting, which is climate change? Will Europe build trust and recover its place in Africa, where 17 countries abstain to vote and to condemn Putin. And Putin is now spreading its value in Africa instead that you present in Africa. So I wish you success. As President of Liberal International, I'm supporting everything Europe is doing to become stronger with all our Liberal family. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Hakima, and thank you for always effective cooperation between Liberal International and ALDE Party. We hope to continue our good relationship and to build up even stronger relationship between Liberal International and ALDE family. And indeed, European Union and Africa should play important role in global challenges. As you rightly mentioned, Putin is not stopping in Europe. He has his own puppets and he influences the democratic people in other continents as well. Hendrik, you wanted to come up, and then a gentleman next to you.
Thank you. I'm Hendrik Mortensen. I'm Vice President of ALDE. Thank you so much for some very, very thoughtful and impressive statements, particularly on the need for leadership in Europe. And I was reminded of one of my fellow liberals in Denmark who said that Putin did not invade Ukraine because he was afraid of the rest of Europe, but he did it because he wasn't afraid of the rest of Europe. I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I think it's very important, as you've all stressed, to put emphasis on the need of expanding the European Union to the rest of the Balkans, which are not members. But I would like to hear your insights, and particularly perhaps you, Sabine. Is there the necessary popular support for this all over the Balkans? And what about potential pockets of resistance in Republika Srpska, for instance? Can we overcome that? And can we overcome resistance in the western part of the Union? Of course, I was thinking of the resistance of my own country, Denmark, and France under Macron to the enlargement, because I completely agree. From a political point of view and from the point of view of leadership, we have to act now. I mean, if we haven't had the leadership of Helmut Kohl, we would still be discussing whether we should unify Germany or not. So action is needed.
So, distinguished panel, I would like to hear your comments on this particular question, because it's very important one. We always had this debate in our Brussels bubbles, but also beyond that. Do we need more enlargement, or what is the acceptance of the western part of the European Union? And Sabina, I would like to start with you. How much Bosnians like European Union?
Very much so. But before I get to that, let me just say 2 sentences about Emil's question. The first town hall meeting was held in Sarajevo, right? And I participated in it. I was also on the panel. And I'm delighted that you're here with us today. I think it's safe to say that Sarajevo really adored Hans and that he loved Sarajevo, so we loved having him there. So it's also an emotional thing to sit on the first and the last panel of this kind. And I remember something you said. There was an intervention from a member of the opposition from Serbia. And I will never forget what your response to that, Ilhan, was on the panel. It's not a question of what we are against, but what we are for. If we are only communicating as liberals what we are against, then we are not providing vision, and it's not enough. And it's playing defense and not essentially providing a vision and leadership. When it comes to Western Balkans, and particularly Bosnia, and popularity of the EU, still overwhelming majority in both entities, in Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Republika Srpska, desire to be members of the EU. And that is actually a common denominator for Bosnia and Herzegovina, one of not many common denominators among Croats, Serbs, and Bosniaks in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's another example of why it is necessary, because then truly is a peace project. Security policy, there are different attitudes, but when it comes to the EU, yes, the support is, I would say, dwindling, maybe to some extent even falling, minusculely, but falling, because there is this, I think, understood and seen apathy from the other side of Europe, and then there is a sense of lack of vision of joining. So there is no clear path. There is no clear path. There are local politicians to be blamed, and nationalists who would need to cut the tree on which they're sitting, the branch on which they're sitting in order to join the EU. And quite frankly, many of them would be, if the conditions for reform of judiciary system, would be in prison, to put it bluntly. But still, despite all that, the popularity of the EU remains high. And as I said, in many instances, I think higher perhaps than even within the EU.
Yeah, Hans really loved Sarajevo, and I remember one of his conference speeches in Sarajevo. He said, "Past belongs to nationalism in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but future belongs to naša stranka." So thank you for being with us
Thank
today.
you.
Guy, want to comment, and then Helmut?
No, like I said, I come back from Kiev. I did it by Lviv, and Lviv by train, and then to Krakow. And yeah, if you want to see what the European Union, the positive effect of an enlargement of the European Union, you have to take that road from Lviv to Krakow to see the difference. It's a beautiful new motorway, I think, paid with the budget of the European Union, going to the border. Fine, yeah, you think you are in Europe. It could be Western Europe, could be Poland, whatever, modern. And then you come to the border, and then starts. So it's an enormous. It's two different worlds that you see, and that was only possible because of first the end of the Soviet Union, the entrance of Poland in the European Union. So if you do that road of 300 kilometers, 100 kilometers on Ukrainian soil and then 200 kilometers to Krakow, there you see why it is absolutely key and necessary. And in my opinion, that's also, like I said a few moments ago, the basis for stability in Europe. Because countries who are outside, have European aspiration and are outside the European Union are a source of instability. Because there is always the threat, look to what is happening in Moldavia, look what is happening in Georgia, look what is happening in Serbia, to use these countries as a place to undermine the Union, Europe, European values, and yeah, to go forward with this autocratic rule that we see today. So I hope that this will be the mindset when in June during the European Council they have to decide, for example, on Ukraine. And the fact that I found it a little bit crazy, von der Leyen going with a questionnaire to Kiev, to country who is in the middle of the war, like they have the time to answer the questionnaire of the European Union, like they don't know what the answers are on the questions that they. I find it crazy, but okay. Apparently, we cannot escape that. But I hope that the pressure is so big and the necessity is so immense that now in June we can give a candidate member status, and that we can overcome the classical, I should say, resistance. This classical resistance, yeah, that's in my opinion, can be overcome by the gravity of the situation now in Ukraine, and these people. So it didn't start on the 24th of February when we were there with Hans in 2014. It was about what? It was about the EU association agreement that Yanukovych didn't want to go forward with. So the Maidan revolution started there with the European aspiration of the countries, and it are the European aspiration of the whole population. Don't let you fool by the propaganda of Russia. Yeah, in Ukraine there are Russian people living. No. They speak Russian. That is not the same as being Russian. Klitschko, the mayor, when we speak with his secretary, he's speaking Russian. Zelensky at home speaks Russian. Kurkov, the best writer in the Ukrainian literature, is Russian speaking. He writes in Russian. He can only not be published in Russia, and that's something different. So there is an absolute will also by the 40-45% Russophones that live in Ukraine to belong. And that means also that when we do all this and we go in that direction, we need also to rescape our policy and strategy toward Russia itself. We need to get rid a little bit of this defensive attitude toward Russia. I mean with that we need also change in Russia for the future. So to do more for the democratic opposition, to give visas to artists, young people who want to travel to Europe, to organize the diaspora. The Russian diaspora today is growing every day. It was already since 2008 500,000 a year growing, mainly of young people, bright people, Russian people. Not organized at all, absolutely not enough organized at all. And we have to recognize Russia as Russian language, as a language of the European Union. There are millions in the Baltic states for who it is the mother tongue. And if Ukraine enters in the European Union, there will be 20 million, okay? Russian-speaking people, but who believe in Europe and in European values. So we need to have an agenda toward Russia with a positive, offensive agenda so that we can take away also the arguments that Putin is using in Russian society, and that is working in Russian society, that we are in fact anti-Russian language, Russian culture, and so on and so on. What is not true. Because in my opinion, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky make parts of the European culture and European civilization.
Well, it's a good sound to my ears, but the more problematic question is how we can convince the non-convinced citizens in European Union when it comes to classical debate like this one between Le Pen and Macron, for example. Helmut.
The most difficult question given to me, because I wanted to say a few other things, but I think a lot about that, because it's also, talking about the Balkans, Western Balkans in Austria, that's rather easy because of the history, because they are so near, but we don't do enough, One example, when there was a huge flood in Serbia, I think it was 2014, was a huge flood, and there are lots of Serbs living in Austria. So I was editor-in-chief of a big newspaper, so we did a collection, to help people in Serbia. And so we collected the money, and with the former foreign minister Kurz, we went to Belgrade, and Mr. Vucic talked to us. And you know what he said? He said, thank you very much, and great, and I'm European, we work together, Europe, and so on. And he said, but if you ask people down on the street, who's helping us right now, 90% would say it's the Russians. Yeah. You know what? The Russians don't give us a dime, nothing. It's the Europeans who help us. And so I said, yeah, and do you tell it to your people that we are? No. And he said, of course he did. No, what did he say? He said, of course. Did we tell them? We did not. So what is? I'm back with the emotions. Where are the emotions? And that goes for the Balkans. That also goes for Austria, Belgium, for the member states of the European Union. How do we explain not only the common history, but that we all have a profit if we work together? We don't do that. And coming back to the Balkans, I had a conversation with your ambassador to Vienna a few weeks ago, and if I remember the figure right, it was 80,000 people who left your country alone within the last year. Exactly. So is the European Union attractive? Yes, it is. Is it a good sign? Of course, it's not a good sign, because they're well-educated people, very well-educated people, especially from the healthcare system and other things.
And they're not going to Moscow to study.
Very good point. They're not going to Beijing, they're not going to Shanghai, they're not going to Moscow, not to St. Petersburg. Of course, they're going to the European Union. So it's good in that case for the European Union, because we need those people, but it's very bad for your country, because if all these well-educated people leave. So that means, of course, that as soon as possible, we have to get you inside the European Union. But there's so many open questions. How about Kosovo? So where is the answer to that? Can we give the answer to Kosovo? No, we can't. It's only the Serbs who can give that. And not only the Serbs. Who are the other countries who did not recognize Kosovo yet in Europe?
5 non-recognizers.
You see? So, next thing, how do we solve that? There's so many open questions, but it's always back to emotion. We have to convince people that it's in our advantage, that we all have a profit, that it's all in our advantage. And one word about Africa, which I also learned in this book. Of course, we know there are huge investments, and this Belt and Road Initiative also is part in Africa. China is investing a lot of money, taking out a lot of resources out of there, and so on. But they do investments, and they do a lot there. How is the soft power of China in Africa? Small. If you ask people, and that's I learned in this book, and there are a lot of polls, if you ask people, is it good that the Chinese are in my country, in different African countries? Not really, you know, they don't see the advantage. So this is our chance, because of course it's much more attractive to cooperate with free and liberal countries than with China, because they do everything, that they have the profit from this BRI and so on. And but the next question in Europe: why do we have a 16+1 initiative with China? This is crazy. There must be a EU 27 plus all the other European countries, of course. And then we talk together with China, but we don't 16+1. And then they say to the Greek people, but you know, we have this motion now in the in the UN about the Uyghurs. It's not in our interest. If you vote, you don't vote with the Europeans. Okay, we don't vote with the Europeans. You know, they blackmail us. So we have to understand what we are doing. But of course, the most important is the Western Balkans. But we have to solve. We have to also tell the people what are the open problems. So it is Kosovo. It's rule of law. It's free media. Of course, it's Republika Srpska, and it's the influence of Russia again. It's the influence of China. But that we can explain to our people. If the Chinese take over the Western Balkans, we don't, you know, forget about a free and wealthy Europe.
Absolutely.
But,
Let me pick up a couple of questions, please.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. I have a couple of observations. First of all, the accession that you mentioned. I covered the entrance of the Visegrad 4 extensively in the 90s. And there was one element that we still are dealing with, which is not just the filling out and the compliance with the acquis communautaire, it's also the actual implementing in society itself. And that takes far more years than we thought in the 90s. And the current situation in Poland and Hungary, in my opinion, the result of the fact that we went in too fast without realizing that the transition of society, as we've seen in Central Europe, is taking far more years. It's far more complicated than we thought in the 90s. So when it comes to the Western Balkans, I covered that as well for 9 years. And my suggestion would be pick up from the lessons that we learned with the enlargement in Central Europe. And if we allow those countries in the Western Balkans in, be prepared from Brussels, but also especially from us as liberals, to be on the ground, understand what the needs are, and not of the politicians, but of the people there. Which brings me to my second observation, which is expectation management. I lived in France for 9 years. In the village where I lived, they voted Macron in 2017. The first round, a week ago, more than 50% voted for Le Pen. They hate French nationalists because they're in Bretagne, so they don't like French nationalists at all. But Le Pen is a better alternative than Macron. Europe is regarded as a distant organization. We have to make clear in the communication from Brussels, but also from the political parties, whether it's the Liberals or the Social Democrats or whatever, what we do. There is in accountancy an approach which is called integrated reporting, which makes clear immediately the effort and the output. If there's one thing that Europe is good at, it's making clear what the input has been. far less what the output was for the people on the ground. The people in the village that I knew for 9 years have absolutely no idea what Brussels does for them. The farmers in the village very well know that Brussels is a distant organization that's handing out subsidies to the big farming companies, not to them. So my neighbor, for example, was earning 900 euros a month. He didn't get any subsidies from Brussels. And he had to take 2 day jobs in order to make ends meet. Who is he blaming? Brussels. There's no reason for that.
Yeah, there is a fundamental reason for that. That is that the politicians, because they are responsible, are saying that it's Brussels. That's the way.
Of course,
that's the way it works. Even in a lot of competences that we even not have with the European Union, they're gonna say it's Brussels. That's the way to escape your own responsibility.
But that's a pattern that we've been seeing for the past decades.
I agree.
And I think our communication should be far more efficient and should be far more connected. What we do, what the results are, and what it means for a village.
Communications.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, it's not just the communications, it's also the actions.
Yeah.
It's all, as you suggested, that's not a communication issue, it's a policy issue who gets the agricultural subsidies. Not just obviously.
That's true, but how you but that's what I meant with the.
I understand. I'm just supporting what you're saying.
Could you come to your?
Yes. So that's what
I want to come back to your first point about Poland
but
and the
so many
enlargement
people
issue.
are willing to speak. So
that's what I meant with the expectation management. I think we should improve on expectation management. And if I could finish with a small question to all of you, how do you see? Let me phrase it differently. Do you think we are able quickly to improve our communication or our expectation management, especially with your ambition to enlarge the European Union quickly? Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to come to that now because so many people are willing to intervene. Please, ma'am. I'm going to collect the questions.
Thank you. My name is Somaye Dehban, a Dutchified Iranian living in exile here, and I find quite a comfortable home within VVD and our Liberal Party and ALDE. Today we heard a lot about mindset, about attitude, about emotions, and all of them are needed in order to take not too late actions, but bold and taking a leading position. And for me, it comes back to our identities. We identify ourselves as liberals sitting here. But what does it really mean to be a liberal? Do we all have a similar understanding of it, or is it each of us have defined our liberal identity within our own party, within our own context, and coming back to the broader scope of the Europe and say that we all are liberals without actually having a common ground of what liberalism means. And to look at internally at our own party, VVD, we talk about freedom, we talk about responsibility, and then we come to reciprocity. And that's where it becomes about the context where we are living. But isn't it the time that we move away from this individual in isolation, defining what does liberalism is for an individual, what does it do for an individual, and then at a later stage just talk about what does it mean in the context, and that's where we talk about reciprocity. Isn't it the time for every European country to start defining their values, not talking about the norms, but just the values within the European context? And isn't that the solution to having the emotions that is needed to take bold decisions, having the mindset to move forward, and having the attitude to wanting our leaders to take the leadership position?
Thank you. Could you pass the microphone to the gentleman? I'm going to organize this process a bit a la carte, but we don't have much time. So.
Thanks very much. My name is Hans Moyet from The Hague. Much has been said about the rule of law, Europe delivering. In order for Europe to be able to deliver, the quality of national institutions matters. And I think part of the concern in capitals about enlargement is based on the current rule of law situation in the European Union. And the track record of the European Union, and especially of the European Commission, unfortunately, has not been very promising so far. So my question is, how can we ensure that the European Union can have more leverage? Because the Commission is wavering with the RRF plans of Poland and Hungary. The cooperation and verification mechanism doesn't seem to deliver results. So how can Europe have more leverage, also to give reassuring signs also to the citizens?
Thank you.
It comes back to the first question.
Yeah, and Nathan is next, please.
We need to tackle this.
Yeah, we'll tackle them, all of them, yeah.
No, at the end it will be the European Union because member states are not acting. That's the point. But okay, I come back.
Thank you. My name is Nathan Al-Bahari. I come from Serbia, one of the recently 3 elected liberal MPs that will be serving in the next parliament as part of a pro-European coalition that is now finally back in parliament after several years of absence. So we are making some progress, but there's going to be a lot of work for us, a lot of challenges, and of course we are hoping also and looking forward to your help and assistance in that matter. I just want to come back to there was a point here about the resistance in the Western Balkans, or in this case in Serbia under Aleksandar Vučić. There was a poll that came out a few days ago that indicated for the first time in Serbia there is now more people against membership of Serbia in the European Union than those who are for. And this is the first time it has happened since the year 2000 when the process began. And it goes back to what you said about the floods when you were speaking to President Vučić. The control of the media, you know, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine started, our tabloids and all of the media controlled by the government, which includes the public broadcaster, all of the national TV frequencies, have basically been repeating Kremlin talking points, have basically been taking a pro-Russian position, and at that same time an anti-Western, anti-European position. So it is no wonder then when we see these results, and it is something, my question is, and going back also to the rule of law issues and the way the Commission has been treating the accession process when it comes to Serbia and the Western Balkans in general, it seems that there is no appetite for serious action. For years, I come from civil society, for years we have been begging the Commission to take the freedom of media more seriously and put pressure on the government to do something, and the response has always been lukewarm. The response from Aleksandar Vučić's allies in the European Parliament, the EPP, has been very lukewarm and has been protecting the sister party of EPP in Serbia. And my question is, what can we, either as parliamentarians or you as parliamentarians in your member states or the European Parliament, are there any mechanisms left, are there any avenues left if the Commission won't act, especially in the enlargement commissioner being Mr. Veheli, who comes from Hungary and from Fidesz, is not something. There's not a positive outcome that we can have in Serbia. So we'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Please, the gentleman.
Hi, I'm Olivier. I'm part of the Organization for Freedom and Democracy, Young VVD. I'm wondering, actually, the EU is not really clear about their strategy after Ukraine joining the EU. So we'll be also codependent on the US and saying, oh, we are fine with the NATO, and then go to the US to protect our borders, or what will happen? Because the EU is not clear about that. The second thing, which is really kind of important, what about us? And what about us? I mean, the people who are under 30, we don't have any representation, actually, if we are under 30, even in the EP, at least not for 25% or even 20%, or at ALDE. So what about the future? Because I think this is a really important factor that it should be considered.
All right, thank you so much. 3 more interventions, please. 4. More.
See, and nobody had questions in the beginning, so clearly we inspired enough questions.
We spoke from the beginning and they're asking questions now. That's good.
Hi, I'm Garvin Walsh. I actually have a tech startup that works combating Kremlin and populist propaganda. And I was struck by the AI question and why it is that there are so few European tech companies that stay here. And one of the things is got to do with the fragmentation of the legal framework. A particular question comes to, this is a bit technical, but tax law, stock options for employees. We have people, staff around Europe, but it's very difficult to incentivize them because they get taxed heavily once the company actually becomes valuable. So I wonder what we can do as Europeans to, first of all, create an integrated European framework for these kind of incentives, but also to make sure that we can reward our employees properly if we turn out to become extremely successful in the next few years.
Thank you. Gianfranco?
Thank you. Gianfranco Dell'Alba, International Officer of Più Europa. I take the advantage of the presence of the panelists to raise a question, to ask you about a proposal that was suggested this week by the Secretary of the Democratic Party, Enrico Letta, that certainly Guy knows very well, and certainly also the others. He suggested in an article to challenge this, to face this challenge of the Ukrainian statute, because as you have mentioned, we can say that is a candidate country, and after it will take years and years in order to accept them really. And so he suggested to propose to Ukraine, to Georgia, to Moldavia, to the country that are, and to the Western Balkan state, a statute of to put in place a confederation, a sort of a circle limited with certain only with certain let's say certain power or certain thing in common, just to send a message to these countries that before to join the EU they can be member of this broader circle. What do you think about it?
Okay, thank you, Gianfranco. 2 more interventions. 3? Okay.
Good afternoon, my name is Maria. I'm from Liberal Forum from Brussels, and I'm also Ukrainian, so I think it's important to share also perspective, which I have developed looking from both sides. And my vision observing the situation, particularly in these 2 months, was that a bigger part of the problem is, a very big part of the problem is the lack of EU strategy on Ukraine now, but also in the past at least 8 years, 10 years, and because initially the idea was that Ukraine was being treated as one of the Eastern Partnership countries. So basically, in a nutshell, what it turned out to me that the EU was trying to keep Ukraine in the loop without, while also preventing it to getting too close to the EU, which is as a result, caused a lot of problems for Ukraine, but also for the EU, because it makes the European position look a bit vague, a bit weak. What was actually the reason of the EU, behind the EU strategy of trying to engage with Ukraine? And also now, I think it's a result of this previous strategic mistakes or a bit of misunderstanding, is that what is the EU's goal in this war? What is the ideal result for the EU? Whether the EU wants Ukraine to win the war, whether it just wants to help Ukraine to defend itself, what it means, and all this, the lack of very clear answers to this question actually makes it difficult for the EU to react, to act, because now the EU is reacting, which means it's a little bit behind, a few steps behind all the time, and instead of acting and setting the agenda and indeed promoting its own vision as it should be doing, actually, taking into account the Ukraine's territory, the Ukraine's strategic position, and also I want to. Now I'm thinking how difficult it was for the EU, all the resistance when it came to giving Ukrainians a visa-free regime a few years ago, because there was a lot of fear on the European side, all these millions of Ukrainians, what will happen if we give them a visa-free regime. But at the end of the day, it was a huge deal breaker for Ukrainians. Nothing horrible happened, and it just made Ukraine much closer to Europe, made Ukrainians feel much closer to Europeans, and what I'm saying it not only because I'm Ukrainian, but mostly because I understand it because I'm Ukrainian, that Ukrainians' will to join the EU should be taken for granted because it's indeed, it's not a given. As we can see in the regions, in the countries around the EU, it's really not a given that a country really sincerely, entire population wants to join the European Union, is ready to work for it. And I think now it's indeed a very important moment which cannot be missed, that the EU has to develop a strategy on Ukraine as it is developing a strategy on China, for example.
Absolutely.
A strategy on China.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. 3 more interventions?
Wow.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, distinguished panel. I have a question. What are we doing about the home front? If we look at Western Europe, we see that the parties that have traditionally built up European democracy after the war are, well, with some exceptions, evaporating. The people are no longer voting for them. They are not seen as giving the relevant answers to the question people now face. Many people think that the system is stacked against them. They see they have this sense of loss, saying that, well, we used to have respectable jobs, and now things, usually they say in part to the European Union, we're losing that. And what are we going to do to make sure that the next election is not going to be between Macron and Le Pen, but between Macron and at least another democratic candidate?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Margaret, last but not least.
I have a question. It was mentioned that we should do something about helping the opposition in Russia, Yabloko, and I see that they are still online. What could we do as ALDE to help them to communicate to our world that they are against what's happening? And they are giving good suggestions for truces and for exchange of prisoners. So I would like to see what we could do to help them and to show that not all Russians are behind this war.
Oh, certainly. We made this distinction right from the beginning, the discussion between the autocrats, the puppets of Putin in his own circle, and the Russian people. And we are on a daily contact with Olga and others, answering their questions. We took an important decision to waive the membership fee, not only to the Russian opposition parties belonging to the family, but also to the Ukrainians for a year time. So we do a lot with both Kasyanov's party, Barna's, and Yabloko, but also we work in the group with other opposition leaders. So big task ahead of us. 15 minutes to conclude this very lively debate on the future of Europe, rule of law inside European Union, but also in Western Balkans, liberals, what means for us, strategy for Ukraine, a lot of questions. So you want to start, Sabina, this time?
I'll start directly by answering a very simple question on Ukraine. What Ukraine does not need and what Europe does not need is another Dayton Peace Agreement 2 signed in Ukraine, which will give half of Ukraine autonomy to be controlled directly by Moscow and to destabilize not only Ukraine, but entire region and the entire Europe. I strongly believe this. There is enough evidence in Russian think tanks that for years they've been analyzing and looking into Dayton Peace Agreement as what they believe would be an ideal model for Ukraine, and I think this would have devastating effects for Europe and the world. In that sense, this requires liberals not to succumb to the pressures of short-term solutions versus long-term vision. And I will conclude by saying that unfortunately many of you will not like this, and it's a controversial thing to say, that currently European Union in Western Balkans to a large degree is suffocating progressive forces by appeasing the nationalists and favoring talks with the nationalists to the detrimental effects to the progressive forces and liberals in Western Balkans. I will give you a simple example and finish with that. There is an ongoing well, still ongoing, I would say, a process of constitutional reform negotiations, formally ended negotiations, but still with the possibility of continuation of constitutional reform negotiations in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The way that the EU approached this process is devastatingly, has devastating effects for progressive forces. It was behind the closed doors, appeasing the nationalists, fulfilling the desires or wishes of individual nationalist leaders from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and at the same time, and I would say most hypocritically, organizing citizen assembly to come up with a proposal for constitutional reform, which was almost identical to the proposal of my party, Naša stranka. They organized a beautiful press conference with them and then went back to talk to the nationalists. This is something that Ukraine doesn't need, Europe doesn't need, the world doesn't need. And in that sense, I will go back to calling for rediscovering our collective spine and building the muscles around our spine and finding lasting solutions and not quick fixes. Thank you.
Thank you.
So many questions, try
Sure.
short answers. As far as Ukraine is concerned, I think, I don't know, probably the European Commission is doing it already. There has to be a Marshall Plan for rebuilding Ukraine. That's no question. How can we do it? It's going to be complicated, no question. But we know from the success of Marshall Plan here in Europe how good it was. And I really hope that already people are sitting together, you know, taking all the yachts and the airplanes and the villas and so on, but that will not be enough. Of course, it will cost some money, but it's a European responsibility, and I hope they're already working on that. As far as Jabloko is concerned, we had a contact with a group in St. Petersburg during also the last weeks. They asked me not to publish it. You know, because it's a security question. But for me, it was interesting to see their point of view. As far as Serbia is concerned, you know, this is freedom of the media. I come back to Marshall Plan and the United States. What did they do? They took young European, especially Austrian and German journalists, and brought them to the United States, to universities, to different newspapers, to learn what does it mean, free expression, what does it mean, freedom of the media. Also, we didn't do that. Why? I don't know. But it's, for me, that's something Vučić couldn't be against it. We try to get certain editors-in-chief, journalists to European newspapers and European media, TV, to explain to them what is the freedom of the media. And if it does not accept that, I think that I don't see a way for his government to go into the European Union. Talking about liberalism, I read an interview with Francis Fukuyama, which you cited, which you quoted already, and he still sees a future in liberalism. He says in this interview with Neue Zürcher Zeitung, I think is of today, and one of the reasons he said, and I think more or less, if I quoted right, because liberal organizations know how to sort out differences, and I think that's an interesting quote, and I think that's also something which we can explain to people. That's not authoritarian. That's not everybody. I know everything about all the others, but we accept that we have differences, but we learn how we can sort it out. So he still sees a chance. For liberal societies, if we can convince people that it's in their advantage. And I think that's the main topic. If people think it's better to live in an authoritarian system and it's easier to live there and I don't care, then we lose. If it's, and I think it's not so difficult to explain why it is better to live in a liberal system and that we have differences and we can sort them out, then I think we can convince them. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not in disagreement with Fukuyama on the fact on liberal democracy,
of course.
but on the question that he thought that
I know, the end of history.
That it was already a case who was won.
He was wrong. He was wrong.
By saying that, because I think that the case for liberal democracy is a daily fight, and the examples given a few moments ago about how liberal democratic leaders accommodate, when they try to find solutions, their opponents, that is a disturbing issue, because during the Arab Spring, exactly the same happened. During the Arab Spring, the Americans wanted absolutely moderate Islamists, or not moderate Islamists, in all these new governments during the Arab Spring. And that was a disaster by doing that. And that's also the reason, next point, that in the case of Ukraine, what we have to hope is a victory of Ukraine and to stop Putin and not a new frozen conflict like we have one in Georgia, in Moldavia, and so on, because that will continue the destabilization and will be a lack of security. So we need to go, I think, full in sanctions. We need to go full also in the military aid. We need to go full scale also financially. It's not only a question of rebuilding. Today, Ukraine has a need every month of 7 billion euro to cover their needs, to pay the soldiers, to pay the pensions of the pensioners, to survive. So it's not only a question of heavy weapon, it's also a question of giving the money. And in the coming days, that problem needs to be solved. And it's not solved today. Where is these 7 billion so that they can survive and they can win this war? And then I come back to the questions about the enlargement, and because the impression was, because of enlargement, we have now the problem Poland and Hungary. No, sorry, that's not true at all. At the moment of the enlargement, when these countries entered in the European Union, they fulfilled the Copenhagen criteria. They were full-fledged, good-working democracies. That's not, sorry, there was a civic platform. Yeah, okay, you can see it with your own eyes. I see also with my own eyes lack of democracy in our own countries in Western Europe, by the way. I can give you a long list of it. Of such situations, but they were applying Copenhagen criteria, and Mr. Orban, I saw him in '89, so I was maybe the first in this whole room here who saw Mr. Orban, and Mr. Orban, Fidesz, you know what Fidesz means? Yeah, this is the student organization of the Liberal Party, yeah? Yeah, but you I spoke to him in 1989. 89. So 5 years before you.
You win.
5 years before you. He was, by the way, member of our organization. Okay, let's be honest. He was member of our movement. And he was a liberal, and everybody said, fantastic, and you do it very great. And he did it great. And then he lost the elections. And then he said, I can only come back as a pure, good Hungarian nationalist. That's the way what happened. Is that because of the enlargement of the European Union? No. It's because also of our own lack to be courageous and to do something about Hungary and to do something about Poland.
Bravo.
Because the reality is that the situation exists already for years. European Parliament has asked to launch the Article 7 years ago. 3-4 years ago, I think, we launched the Article 7 procedure. And in the meanwhile, in the Council, they were not even ready to discuss it once in a serious way. That's the reality of today. So, pointing the finger, and the same is happening now with the Commission. The Commission have the rule of law mechanism, have not the guts, let's be honest, to use the rule of law mechanism. Certainly now, not against Poland because of Ukraine, etc., but they have not the guts to do it. And then there is the question that has been asked, what you can do against it? There's only one way. Not to ask now to the European Parliament to become the European executive. I want to do it, if you ask me, so no problem. In 5 minutes we can do that. But that's not the way it works. The only way it works is that we send home the Commission if they don't apply the treaties. That's we need to do at a certain moment. Maybe not now, we are in a crisis situation, but at a certain moment, if we as European democracy have not the guts to say, you don't do your job, we send you go, it's not a good working system. In a real democracy, that's the way it has to work. So we have the rule of law mechanism, we have Article 7, it is not applied tomorrow. I'm personally in favor to give that task to the European Court of Justice. I think the European Court of Justice is for me the competent authority, not only to take a decision on the substance, but also to decide on the sanctions. Why not? That happens also in our own democratic system. And I think they will be more courageous than the whole European Council together, including the European Commission. Because it is not politicized, yeah? And I think that is the way forward, even when also in our own group, there are many people who are against such an idea. But the reality is that it's our own responsibility that there is now such a crisis around Poland and Hungary, because we didn't act from day one. And we continue to think, how many letters we have already written to. That doesn't mean anything. So, and it is an existential problem, because if we don't solve it, that will be something that continues. I don't hope that it will happen in Slovenia. I hope that in Slovenia we can... there are so many liberals in Slovenia, so we should be capable to stop at least Janša there, if we are capable to work together, because apparently that's our problem in that country. And then on the last point, maybe on, is that not a solution to, you have an inner circle, and then we give a sort of a second circle, and then a third circle, I don't know how many. I'm not very much in favor of these ideas to say, look, we're going to put you temporarily somewhere in another framework, in another circle. Because, in fact, the European Union, one of the weaknesses of the European Union is exactly that. That is that the European Union is not a union. European Union is a menu card in a restaurant. And you enter and you say, the euro, I don't like that. No, I don't participate. The internal market, I have an advantage of that. That's for me. Okay, I participate. And then Schengen, no, I don't like it either. So not of that. And then a European arrest warrant. No. 10 years, I take an opt-out. Or Denmark, on the issue of the Europol, or defense, and so on. So the European Union is today, with opt-ins and opt-outs and earmarks and so on, a menu card. There are not one European Union, there are at least 27 European Unions today, with different ways of cooperation. And if we add more of this, that weakens at the end the organization and the effectiveness of the European Union. So I think let's now take a political important step. That is to give a perspective clearly to Ukraine and to the Western Balkans at the same time. And that is politically needed also to give a clear signal to Moscow and to the whole world. What is our goal for the future? And then to effectively do our homework and to be sure that when these countries enter in the European Union, they are ready to do so. Because in the case of Ukraine, there's a lot of work to do. On corruption, for example, it's a huge issue that needs to be solved. But I can tell you, I was there now a few days. In every contact, if in the coming weeks we don't give them a perspective on a membership of the European Union, that will have a devastating effect on their fight against autocracy that they are doing. They are now defending European values. They are fighting for the European soil. Today, the capital of Europe is not in Brussels, not in Strasbourg, it's in Kiev. And that we have to recognize now in the coming weeks, if we mean it seriously with defending liberal democracy.
Thank you so much. Can I ask for a round of big applause to our panelists? Thank you for a lively discussion, and Guy, Helmut, Sabine, it was a great pleasure to conclude this panel, and the next one will start at 2 o'clock, moderated by Leonard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are about to start in like 2 minutes, so please have your seat. Get your friends inside who are still grabbing a coffee, and in 2 minutes we will start with an amazing panel discussion. Everyone is silent, so let's slowly start. Welcome back, everyone, after lunch. I hope you had a good lunch. Not just that it tastes well, but also that you had the opportunity to speak to each other again, to meet each other. Over the past 2 years, that was challenging, but fortunately, we are able now to meet again. My name is Leonard. I am International Secretary and Board Member of the VVD. And it is a great pleasure to have you here and to have this panel discussions all together. I will start with a very practical comment, because for all our international guests, it might be a little bit inconvenient and somewhere already being told to each other that there is a strike at Schiphol Airport today. That happened unexpected, somewhere in the afternoon. And that means actually that it is too crowded currently at Schiphol and that they ask you not to go to Schiphol at this moment. They are slowly starting up again. But it means actually that there were roadblocks, that the highways were closed, the railways were closed, but they are slowly catching up again. So they're opening up the airport again. But it could, of course, cause some trouble in your flight schedules. If that is the case, if you've booked your flight via ALDE, I think there is someone in the room, or she's already outside to see what she can fix in order to rebook the flights. If you need any assistance with, for example, a hotel night or whatsoever, or a dinner, then we are happy to be your host here in the Netherlands. And the good news is you're not alone. You're with your liberal friends here. So if you stay a bit longer here in the Netherlands, that is no problem. And if you have to stay until Wednesday, that's actually the best idea, because then we have King's Day in the Netherlands. So don't be worried. Exactly. We will all be wearing orange. So make sure that if you have to rebook your flight, that you will know, don't leave before Wednesday. Maybe, and now we'll get a bit more serious, of course. We are here for a town hall meeting that is named to Hans van Baalen. And we as VVD are very proud, actually, that we can host together with the ALDE this town hall meeting named to Hans van Baalen here in his hometown in The Hague. And also with Ineke here, of course. It was mentioned in the morning as well. But it's great that we have you here during this town hall meeting. It is a great way, of course, to honor the legacy of Hans. And it will certainly not be the last time that we honor his legacy. Before we're going to the reception, we will we will give some remarks on how we will do that in the future as well. We will use the big stages in order to honor the legacy of Hans van Baalen, because I think he inspired many of us, let's not say all of us, and that is something that has to be remembered. When it comes to the panel, another practical thing is that somewhere up in the air, Minister Schreinemacher is on her way to the Netherlands. She's on her way from Washington, where she was as Minister of Foreign Trade. She is, of course, one of the youngest and most talented ministers that we have currently in the Netherlands. But she is on her way, might be a little bit affected by the delay, but she will be here for the reception and for the opening remarks of the reception. So she will be here, and she was very happy actually to meet all her old friends, because of course she was a member of the European Parliament before becoming a minister. So she will very much try her best to come here as well. But we still have an amazing panel. And before we go to the panel, I'd like to start with some personal motivation to stand here on a free Saturday where it's 20 degrees, and I could also play outside with friends and do nice things. But this is even better and nicer because we are in an important moment in history. It was mentioned actually a few times already here on stage as well. But in my generation, I grew up in a time where democracy and liberalism was on the rise. It was like a clear path for the future. Democracies is what we will see in the future. Liberal freedoms are a kind of linear process, and eventually all countries in the world will become democracies. And actually Helmut, I think he's not in the room right now, I don't see him. But he said my parents were somehow pointing guns to each other. That's the world where he grew up. Oh, sorry, Helmut, I didn't see you. And now in this generation where I grew up, actually, it was a generation where everyone believed in the end of history of Francis Fukuyama. Or just in the very visible that within Europe, just a few years before I was born, Spain, Portugal, Greece became democratic countries. A few years after I was born, Romania became a democratic country. Many other countries, of course, in Europe became democratic. And as Hakima said, it is not just something that should happen within the European Union or European context, but also many countries in Latin America, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East chose the path of democracy. But we've learned the hard way, actually, that this is not like the linear process that we believed in. It is something that we have to defend. It is something that we have to fight for. It is not something that we have to discuss in beautiful areas like this, but also something that really we have to work on in order to keep that line going. And sometimes even have to fight back the liberal values that we lost over the past few years. We all know now, of course, the examples of an undemocratic dictator invading a democratic country. a democratic neighboring country, but also within the European Union, we see that democracy is not something that we can take for granted. And also personal experience here. Like a month ago, I was in Budapest to campaign together with our liberal friends there for Momentum. And we were excited to see what was going on in Hungary. It is one of the most challenging countries, of course, to be as a liberal. But it is a European country. It is an EU country where 80% of the media is controlled by the government. And it is so visible when you are walking around the streets there during the campaign. It was something I did not imagine before going there. Together with Anna, we walked around there and it was really striking to see this is what an unfree country can do within the European Union. It is also an EU country where LGBTI rights are being taken away actively by the government, and the rights to be who you are being restricted by a government within the European Union. And it's not the only country where that happens. An EU country where academic freedom and independent judiciary is under pressure. That is something that happens within the European Union. And then, of course, we need those bright stars, the liberal voices, the liberal pioneers that set up new movements, that set up new political parties in order to make the change in the country. And sometimes you have some disappointments. Like, for example, we all hoped that the coalition of 6-7 parties would win and that Márki-Zay would become the prime minister right now of Hungary, but he's not. But the great news is that Momentum, for the first time in history, became a force in national parliament with 11 MPs. And that's an applause, exactly. And I think it was the same day there were elections in Serbia. And Serbia, of course, is dominated by Vučić, another illiberal leader, and openly saying that he's an illiberal leader, an ally of Orban and what he is doing in Hungary. There were elections at the same day, and also in Serbia. Vučić won, of course, with a landslide, 60% in the first round. Never happened before in Serbia. But he is being challenged. His majority is fading away in Belgrade. He might need a coalition there. And we have 3 liberals MPs right now in the Serbian government again, and Nathan is one of them, and that's also worth an applause. Parliament, sorry. And with those liberal voices represented in Parliament, we have to keep on fighting together and as united as possible. So that makes this panel very important, and we have 3 amazing speakers to discuss this today. 3 speakers that know everything about EU democracy, about national democracy, and how we can strengthen it on a European level. I will first introduce all the panel members, ask them to come to the stage, and if we sit all there, they can give their opening remarks. And then we'll go to the floor, the audience, as soon as possible. And during the last panel, we saw how interactive you are and how active you are at this panel and how excited you are to ask your questions. So we definitely give a lot of space to questions. The first one I can introduce to you is someone who studied in Bucharest, was born in Sibiu, former president of the Save Romania Union, a former president of the USR party. And in 2020, he became deputy prime minister as liberal, started small, then became deputy prime minister in a very complicated government, a government where the established powers tried to block any kind of necessary reforms in order to make the change. And a few days after we met in Bucharest, you had no choice but to leave the government, and now you are the leading opposition voice. May I have a great applause for Dan Barna. The second person I can introduce is from Spain. It is Adrian Vazquez. Very happy to have you here. I mentioned that we have a lot of lawyers here in the room and also on the panel, but you also studied Japanese. Something very, maybe you can give your opening remarks in Japanese, see what we can understand. But you also worked on democracy throughout Europe. You worked for the OSCE in Vienna, in Bosnia, and as an international leading figure within the party, you managed to get Ciudadanos in the ALDE party, of which we are, of course, very happy. And since 2020, since the British left, we gained you as a member of European Parliament, so that is a good replacement. Thank you very much for joining us. A big applause.
Thank you, Lena.
Thank you. And the third person is someone who has a very special place in our heart as VVD and ALDE. Not only because she studied here in the Netherlands, of course, in Rotterdam, but also because when she went back to Budapest, she started, together with a few other people, the political force that was elected in parliament recently. And that is, as I said, a huge achievement. So we have a special place in our heart for Katalin. Please, you saw her this morning as well, but again, a great applause, please. Hello. So I will have my seat as well, and I'll ask all the panel members to give their opening remarks. We agreed like 5 minutes opening statements on maximum, and then we have a very vibrant audience here and go to the questions. But maybe when it comes to strengthening democracy in the European Union and strengthening democracy within the member states, Mr. Barna, can I ask you to get the floor first and give your comments on those questions?
Thank you. I'm quite happy to be here, to join the liberal family, I can say, because as I was introduced, I'm in the politics only from 2016. Before that, I was just a regular entrepreneur with literally no connection with the political in any ways. So in the last 4 years, I was president of the Save Romania Union and deputy prime minister in the last year, and I stayed almost all my time in the country dealing with the positions I had. So from this reason, it's a great opportunity to have the chance to meet you in an event like this, and I hope to have the chance to be part of the European family in the next years, because I intend to develop my connection and my friendship with you, and I hope the cocktail after this one will help us. Talking about our topic and talking about this conference of Future of Europe, it is an element we should be proud of, that this conference is coming from the ALDE and Renew, is coming from the liberal perspective of Europe. It is one of our important projects, and Guy is not here, but congrats for him for co-chairing this conference. But it is one element important for us to acknowledge and to talk about, because the main key, in my opinion, in my experience, as you know, USR, it's sort of good practice, is considered a good practice in terms of emerged parties succeeding to become relevant. In the last elections, we doubled the number of MPs. We started in 2016 with 40, now we are 80. And the most strong line I transmitted to my colleagues, to my member party, and I think could be also delivered at the European level in our family, is to be proud of our idea and talk about them. Not only in meetings like this, not only in campaigns, but with our colleagues in the offices, in our businesses, in our holiday trips. I mean, it's not, if we want to be credible, we should be proud of ourselves and our lines. So this conference is this kind of element, because a lot of people are talking about this conference with pros and cons, but we should agree that it is one of our projects, and this is quite important. My intervention is somehow related to the idea that the citizens should change their position for public opinion to decision makers, or at least should be more involved in this not only perceived element, but the real element. Because the main question is the legitimacy received through vote every 4 years is enough any longer? I mean, is this mechanism every 4 years we are asking the citizens, come to vote, go to vote, get out to vote, and then for 4 years they became just public opinion. And it seems, and this is one interesting result of the result of the conference, that for citizens, maybe because of the level of education, which is increasingly, and I'm saying this because the Factfulness book, I'm sure some of you read it, about what we do think and what is the truth. Maybe because of the level of education, largely speaking, the citizens are not any longer comfortable just to be considered decision makers once at 4 years. So also this conference, I think it was a result of the lack of traditional institutions to be democratic any longer, or I don't know, maybe it was all the time the same, but now it's quite obvious. And the funny thing is that the civil society is not an answer, because even the civil society increasingly, significantly in the last years, which is a fact, in the same time, civil society vehicles, NGOs largely speaking, became more and more institutionalized. And they are not, or slightly representing the voice of the citizens, largely speaking. So the answer is exactly this conference and this mechanism to somehow convince the people that the decision makers are willing, and here is interesting, the discussion I'm sure will follow, it's a matter of will, to what extent the present decision makers are able to accept and to share their grip to the decision and to the power, because that's the key in this moment. Because this conference is great. Okay, there were some shortcomings observed, mentioned, true, but in this moment, it is a benchmark in setting the standards of participatory democracy. But the key element is this conference should not remain just a pilot, just a program, nice, well done, nicely done. But if nothing changes, if we will not succeed to make the mechanism working in order the citizens have a real feeling that they can contribute to the decision, will be just a nice story to discuss in cocktails after conferences. So the key in this moment is in how we will succeed to use this first step ALDE was part of, and we should be proud of, as I said, how can it become a functional mechanism of the European Union in order to be more credible, because we are talking about more European, all the liberal lines, which are correct lines, are saying that more Europe in each country is the key for the future. The war in this moment, happening in this moment in Ukraine, help us there are some opportunities in putting the extreme aside and creating a credible voice for a stronger union. But in which extent will we could block, and Guy mentioned something before, could block in the European family the illiberal lines, because democracy have this side effect, which is true, saying, okay, in some countries, the results show that illiberal regimes are legitimate. How we will succeed as mechanism to avoid that these voices became too relevant and too strong and having a weakened effect of the union. This is another question. I'm curious your position to this element. But in these sensitive issues, I'm convinced, and I'll finish with these lines, that talking with the citizens, we could identify interesting perspectives to develop the political lines assumed at the institutional level. This is what I wanted to say in opening. I'm sure the discussion will be quite interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For questions.
Big applause. We will get to the questions later, but there's certainly a lot of things that you say I think there will be questions about. Indeed, what do you do with countries that democratically vote for an undemocratic leader? And how do you make sure that democracy is something that is really into the institutions and not something that is just a layover or something that you just discuss sometimes? Thank you very much. We'll get to that later. We discussed before we started actually that we had a certain order, of course, because you did the opening remarks and want to do the closing remarks of the opening here. We first go now to Adrian to ask what your opening remarks are for this panel discussion. So you can a little bit reflect on what you heard as well.
Oh, lovely. First of all, thank you. Thank you all for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be in ALDE in The Hague. Thanks to the party and to VVD for organizing this. Actually, I have a flight this afternoon.
Sorry to hear
I
that.
was not expecting a strike in Netherlands under a VVD government, but it happened. Just kidding.
It happens here as well, sorry.
It happened here as well. So, jokes apart, I'm going to take over what Dan said. And we discuss all the time how are we going to fight against these illiberal movements that they're raising all across Europe. And maybe it sounds bold or simple, but for me, the solution is quite clear and simple, which is winning elections. That's what we have to do to fight against these illiberal movements. We have to win elections. The thing is that if we look into the electoral trends that we have seen in Europe in the last 15 years, there are two main political families, those who have been in most of the governments during the last 30, 40 years, what we call in Spain bipartisan, socialist, conservative. They have such an unsuccessful trend in the last 15 years that one starts to think that they're not going to be able to recover. But on the other side, which is the bright side, not only because it's us, but because we don't have such numbers, when it comes to the liberals, and you also analyze the electoral results in different countries during the last 10 years, or during the last 4 or 5 European elections, we are quite steady on double digits, and we also have the capacity to give birth to new movements that are centrist, that are liberal, anti-corruption, and they actually make it to governments, like it happens with Ciudadanos in Spain with regional governments, make it to the parliament, like Momentum, or even make it to the presidency of a big country, like Macron. Yeah. But we're the only ones. I was, before listening, well, when I was coming this morning from Spain, I was looking to those numbers. And well, if you go to Google, probably I'm not going to be 100% accurate, but just forgive me that. If you take from the 2009 elections, which is when basically we had the huge economic crisis, Men in Black, peaks, when I think for the first time Europe became a voting driver in many countries, like it happens in France in 2004 with the Constitution, and then what will happen in the UK with the existence of UKIP, and then with Cameron getting out of EPP, founding ECR, and so on. But if you check the elections from 2009 to 2019, the Socialists, they have lost almost 8 percentage points, and it's not like this, it's like this. And the EPP has lost 13 percentage points, and it goes like this. And the interesting thing is you see that you take the other families, you take the Greens, you take the extreme left, GUE, and you take us, and we are quite stable. We have maybe 1.5 point up or down, but quite stable. And where all those votes are going? Where all those votes are going? And then you see how ECR has not stopped growing. And then you also see how different groups, in the previous term was EFDD, now it's called ID, they're just getting more and more and more votes. If you sum those two groups together nowadays, which is extreme right and Eurosceptics, they're over 13.5%. While 10 years ago, they didn't even reach 5%. So we have a huge problem with that, because we can talk a lot about policy. We can talk about how liberals we are going to save the world and so on. But if we don't find a way to win elections to these people, the trend is not on our side. And we cannot expect the old political parties to be there, because they're not going to be there. They're just losing. And then there is another thing I want to say on this. Yeah. When you lose elections and you see these liberal movements going up, and we see it in the parliament, we see it in the national governments, the problem you also see it in the political figures, in the leadership. So if you go to 2009, it was the first time that there was a non-liberal / socialist / conservative prime minister in the European Council, which was David Cameron, of course, because he went out to ECR. And for a couple of years, we have the Polish twins, just a couple of years. And then we get to 2014. And what happened in 2014? For the first time, there is a populist, Eurosceptic, anti-Euro prime minister sitting in the council. I don't know if you know who it is, but he was from Greece, Tsipras, Syriza, who, by the way, finally has been institutionalized by the socialist family, which is not bad news at all. But then you go to 2022, and out of the 27, there are 6 prime ministers that they don't belong to any of the 3 traditional families. And this is, again, a trend that is not going to stop. So we can talk about COFOE, we can talk about the Spitzenkandidaten policies, but with a council that goes in this way, with the capacity they have to block this kind of reforms, it's never going to happen. It's just never going to happen. So I don't want to put here the controversial note to the discussion, but I really think that, again, going back to the numbers, and I'm a lawyer by training, but I like a lot electoral numbers. If you go to the numbers, we see that the only possible political platform, ideology, values, however you want to call it, that is actually keeping steady and strong on electoral numbers across Europe, and at the same time defends the union and defends liberal values, that's us. So we cannot waste time being divided. We cannot waste time saying how we're going to be called. I don't mind if you call me liberal, retired, football. I don't mind the name. I just want to be all together and understand that it's either we put ourselves and our house in order. There is no way we're going to fix this. There is no way we're going to fix this. And we have 2 years for the next stop on the road. And if in the next 2 years we're going to see another government changes, that they are going to happen. In Spain, probably we're going to have Vox in the government. Maybe tomorrow we have bad news.
Exactly.
That will make it 2 less members of the European Council.
then the Europe that we all in this room want is going to stop happening. So for me, the key thing, and now I finish, is that we have to look into these trends. We have suffered in the last 15 years 3 situations that they're going to have a huge and radical political reaction. Economic crisis, which divided European societies, north and south. COVID crisis, Europe delivered, but it didn't help to win votes to those who deliver. And now we have a war that is going to create such an unstable situation, maybe with floods of immigrants coming from North Africa, also with the food security crisis, that we have to expect the worst to come. So that's what I wanted to say, and I'm sure that I have triggered some questions. Perfect. So thank you.
But first, a big applause. Thank you. I think this is a very realistic mirror that you have for all of us. The main, and it's also a call for action. Like we as liberals, we have to convince voters and win elections if you want to defend those liberal values that we are discussing, and not just discuss those values. And also, it's very important, I think, to pinpoint here that you say that it's not just some countries that we use as an example, for example, Hungary or Poland, where illiberal voices became strong. I think yesterday, I didn't see the show back yet, but Malik was on national television explaining the French elections, which since a decade actually is explaining that the far right is getting 45% of the votes. So also within the European Union, on the traditional, the founding side, you see that a lot of illiberal voices become big. Also in the Netherlands, we have much more voices in parliament right now that actually are distancing themselves from liberal values and also from the Western point of view when it comes to Ukraine, for example, which would be something unthinkable a few years ago. So thank you very much. Very helpful to have this comment before we start the discussion. And now I come to Katalin, actually, for your starting comments.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on this panel, although I feel a little bit conflicted that I should be talking about how to win elections and how to win battles against autocrats just a few days after we royally messed up our own election, which was one of the most important elections in the decade. So without, instead of starting off with like, yes, I know this, I would rather continue Adrian's train of thought and talk a little bit about why it actually matters that illiberalism is countered. Why is it of everybody's interest to see democracy being fixed in some other countries apart from their own? Because of course for us, probably it's obvious, right? That like we are here, indeed, as Leonard said, on a Saturday. We traveled especially to be in this room with our friends here and talk about, the state of democracy and things like that. But obviously, a great part of our countrymen are out there sometimes. It's like drinking beer, playing football, having fun. And if I ask them that, do they actually care? What do they think about, I don't know, state of democracy being bad in Hungary? Like, too bad, right? Like, I'm fine here. And I just want to make an argument here for why is it drives the sake of the common good, of our common European future, to see not only the economy working well, not only our foreign policy working well, not only our climate action working well, but also our democracy working well. And I will be very pragmatic here at the start. Mm-hmm. So, because we often only link the fight for democracy with moral or ethical issues. Of course we care, right, that people should be able to marry no matter who they love all across Europe, or that everybody should be respected, or the freedom of the media should be valued. And these are like things that we liberals like naturally believe in. But apart from these very symbolic and ideological things, I believe that the unfortunate slowness and reluctance and lack of political willpower that the European Commission has very often demonstrated in the big political battles of values in the past years have actually damaged the European Union on way more areas than on this very particular one. So let me be pragmatic here. As I said in my opening remarks as well, the EU started off as this like nice club of gentlemen, right? We believe that we are sitting around a table with benevolent friends. Everybody is in goodwill. Of course, there are arguments, but everybody is interested in the common good. So we have all the laws and legislation dating back to this long past time. But we have the challenges of the future. And the divergences between the Europe where our laws were drawn and the Europe what we have here are extremely different, as we all know. So we are actually a community right now when it's only enough to have one Trojan horse at the council table, purchased up by China or Russia or by any other malevolent power with this like shady infrastructure dealings or back pocket money. So only one voice is absolutely perfectly enough to block any type of action, anything. Really. If democracy is not working well in other countries, if other country citizens continue to elect guys who veto everything, this is bad for the Netherlands, this is bad for Sweden, this is bad for Estonia, for Spain, like for everybody. Yeah. So this, another. We are making legislation among friends, right? But not really. And there are a number of areas of legislation where it's very obvious to cooperate. For instance, we are working in the European Parliament on things like the European arrest warrant. Totally logical, right? Somebody commits a crime here in the Netherlands, they flee to Spain. Of course, for every Dutch citizen, it's very important to catch this guy in Spain. So, like, let's cooperate. But if we have a country in our community of friends who would actually reach out after those immigrant journalists who left to other countries, or to politicians who are setting up camp elsewhere, if they are in the way for their home government, it's not so easy to cooperate with them on the European arrest warrant, for instance. Or just think about some other things that we really care about, like taxes, money, right? You pay a lot of taxes here, quite a lot. Well, since Spain, you pay.
In Spain's better.
Well, I suppose you pay higher taxes than... Everybody would be happy paying lower taxes. And in a great part of our Europe, a great portion of this tax actually goes to financing governments who are just not playing by our rules. So this is also our financial interest, our financial benefit, to ensure that our democracies are working properly within our community where we are relying on each other. And finally, just for the sake of future, we are talking a lot about enlargement, and we believe in enlargement, right? But as we do not have the mechanisms to keep adherence to our laws, not only until a country is becoming a member of the EU, but also afterwards, the enlargement process will be followed with a number of question marks also for the future. So for our short-term benefits, our long-term benefits, our practical cooperation, and for our financial benefits, it is very, very important to have the political will to fix democracy, not to finance corrupted autocrats, to fix the media situation in our democracies, and create a level playing field for democratic governments to be able to be elected all across our union. This is of our own interests, not only of the interest of the citizens of that specific country. So that's why we are hoping to work together with all of you to create better laws, a stronger Europe, and a stronger democracy within our union. This is of the benefit for everybody.
Perfect, thank you very much. Big applause for Kathleen. And as I said at the beginning of the panel, of course, we do understand the disappointment that you didn't beat Orban this time, but the achievement to get into parliament under these circumstances is very significant. That's another statement. Actually, you join Adrian in the realistic picture, like things are gloomy, we really have to work hard. And it's not something that we can just solve by having the discussions here together. It's really about convincing voters. Actually, you add two other things as well. Firstly is, of course, that strengthening the national democracies itself is a very important task. Of course, you can have a European layer that function well, you can have a European Commission that function well, you can have a European institutions that function well, but it's, as you called it, the Trojan horse within the Council of Europe. It will harm everyone, actually. So it's also about strengthening democracies in the way we have democracies in national parliaments. That's an important one. and that we need a strong mechanism within the European Union, not just before countries join the European Union, but also after. That if countries join the European Union, that they remain democratic countries and are being punished or whatsoever sanctioned if they do not, actually. Before we're going to the audience and grab some questions, so please prepare your questions. If you told me in the break already that they have some questions for this panel, maybe give Barna the opportunity to reflect a little bit on what you heard from the other two speakers, how they gave a more, maybe a little bit more pessimistic but realistic picture about how we can strengthen democracy. Is it something that you recognize?
The truth is, in my opinion, that the part of Europe, like us, it's between, broadly speaking, 10 and 20%. That's the truth. We know. I mean, this is the. In some countries, maybe it's a bit higher, but unfortunately, the liberal movement is not the popular one. So we constantly will have an internal fight to identify those messages and those elements to convince other people, which are not naturally smart entrepreneurs, educated people, understanding that pushing the country ahead and developing business and developing economy in a consistent way will generate benefits for everybody. These people are, as I said, 50% around. So from this perspective, the lack of participations to vote in Romania is a problem in many European countries. It is a real problem. It's generated, I think, exactly of this element of, and it's constantly in Romania, I'm sure, I presume it's the same in the other countries. The people are saying, okay, there are elections, now we are coming to talk to us. And then 4 years, nobody will ask us anything. Mm-hmm. This is a constant line in the street because I made a lot of campaigning on the street. So if we manage having opening this door with this conference happened in this period, if we manage somehow to involve people, maybe this is a way to generate more involvement. Because the problem is exactly this one. It's how can we convince people to be involved in their decision? Because the idea of, which is unfortunately, again, more fragment exactly in our electorate. The people are deciding to take care by their life, by themselves. Okay, after an unpleasant result in Hungary or in Romania, the people are the smart people, exactly those persons with capacity, with energy, with vision. They're saying, okay, I will take my family and I will go in another developed country and that's it. I tried, didn't work, that's it. This is the killing effect for us, for the liberals. Losing the countries, losing exactly the red cells of the blood, of the economic blood of the society. Exactly more competent people are left. So the way our strategy should be for the next years, I mean, ALDE and the liberal parties, to broaden in a way the message that convince the young generation, especially, and the entrepreneurs and the dynamic part of the society, to be politically involved. Because, and I will finish with this, in Romania it is a line, I'm not sure how relevant it is in other countries, all the politicians are wrong, corrupted, untrustful, all the wrong epithets. We, the decent people, should do something else because the politics is not the solution. Or the sad thing is exactly the solution is the politics. There is no other way. I mean, there is no other way to develop a country than to have power, to win elections, have power, and impose your agenda. Otherwise, we are just discussing.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think this is the moment to go to the questions from the audience and the floor. I see a few hands. I know that Rolien already told me, and Sander had questions. There are a lot of hands in the first row. So maybe as you actually to walk around with the microphone. Shall we do it like in the Ilhan did it, like 3 questions and then go to the panel? So we give a lot of opportunities to people to ask the questions. First, Rolien.
Thank you, and thanks to the panel members. I'm Rolien, I'm a member of Dutch Parliament, and I'm an EU spokesperson at the moment. And as an EU spokesperson, I'm also a delegate from the Dutch Parliament to the Conference of the Future. So it's always good to also speak here in The Hague with all of you about this important topic. What puzzles me, I think we have almost never, at least in my generation, have had the need for a strong European Union. I think as we sit here, I think we all share that vision that we, at this moment, need a united and strong union. But I noticed that when I talk to people in the Netherlands, but also at the conference, that we still need to do a lot of explaining why we need the EU and what the added value of the European Union is. And also the previous speaker said about the trend, that there's also a lot of people who are hesitant about and don't see the added value of the European Union. And every day I puzzle again, okay, how can we make it more clear? We have a role as politicians, of course. And at the conference, I was triggered by a lot of citizens who told me, you have to be more transparent. How can we bring, you have to bring Europe closer to the citizens, of course, citizen participation. I think that's a good point. We should not only do that every 4 years or every 5 years. But they also said time after time, you have to be more transparent in why your decision-making process. Do you see some solution in that and breaking the trend, the negative trend?
Perfect, thank you. How can we make it more transparent? We'll do 3 questions here at this row, then have the answers, and then go to the back of the room. So first, please.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Somaye Dehman, a member of FED and individual member of ALDE as well. My first question is for you. You said, where do we get the votes? I think one point that or a couple of points that we are quite missing in the process of actually getting our citizens to go to vote is in the integration, in the integration process. I went through almost 2.5 years of being integrated and granted the Dutch passport. And nowhere in this process I was asked, do you know what is your right and what is your responsibility? Mm-hmm. Do you know when to go to vote? Do you know how many parties are available to vote? I was asked, do you know how to get the money from the wall, the Dutch saying, or do you know when to put your garbage outside, but not about what is my rights and responsibility as a citizen? Wow. The other part, I have 2 little children in primary school here. They know about Easter, they know about Ramadan and anything beyond and between religious celebrations, but they know nothing about democracy, they know nothing about their rights and responsibilities as a future decision makers and active citizens in our countries.
So how can we educate the young generation and also new people coming to the Netherlands?
Absolutely. So this is a missing element, I believe, that needs to be at the European level integrated into our education, into our integration processes. So that's where we can get the votes and win the elections.
Perfect.
And my question,
Yes.
Before the war that we are facing now, if anybody wanted to post something on LinkedIn that had a little bit of political hints, they had to put a disclaimer. Oh, I know LinkedIn is not a political space, it's a professional one, but this is the issue. And now everybody is making a claim about if you are affected by Russian invasion, you can contact me and my business are going to do this and this for you. And that brings me to the point you brought up that we are talking about politics and political relevance of issues just in our after coffee conversations. It's not really embedded in our businesses, in our school education, in our religion, or anything else that impacts us at the personal level. And we treat politics as something out there, not here. And I think that's also another missing point in the way we communicate about politics.
Thank you very much. We go to the 3rd question and then to the panel, and then we go to the back of the room. So you see your hands. We will get to you after this question.
I'm Olivier. I'm a part of the Organization for Freedom and Democracy. So adding to your point about electing a democratic leader in a democratic country or the opposite, I didn't have any homophobic attack in Budapest. I studied there for 7 years for medical school. Well, although I have been attacked here, but anyway, it's not the point. I mean, it's my country. But the whole point is we have been having before homophobic posters in our university. The funny fact is these homophobic posters were actually printed by a printer from the European Union. My anatomy lab is built by the European Union. My medical school is developed by the European Union. My whole faculty of medicine is literally innovated by the money of the European Union. And the fact is the Netherlands pays more than a quarter of it. So part of my own taxes goes to a country where respectively they are nothing without the EU. Respectively. But that's the truth. And respectively though, how would we deal with that? Because it's really nice that we are talking about it, but then what? And yeah, then what? Because it's not fair in any manner of fact that actually the same money that goes to a leadership like in Hungary is actually against our own values.
Perfect. Good question. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the questions. I think there are actually questions for all of you, so I'm just going to ask Adrian, all of you to answer the questions. And start with you, Adrian.
Well, thanks a lot for the questions. Well, I mean, we are among friends. We are a little bit controversial. So the polarizing issue, more transparent, a strong European Union, how we make them go to vote, how we teach responsibility, how unfair is that a government of the European Union is getting money to fight against their values. For me, is it smart to polarize the European Union among citizens? Is that a smart choice? Because if you take any polarizing issue in a given moment through an electoral cycle, it means that you're going to have two blocks. And it seems that we are crossing from the axis of left-right to the axis pro-European against European. What is the problem with that? Of course, Macron can win again on the pro-European axis, and of course, Le Pen can lose again on the against-European axis. But we are all aware that every electoral cycle turns around, right? We are all aware that this is not for good, and that this will change. So, absolutely in. I've been one of those, as chair of jury, I was the guy signing to bring the Commission to court because they were failing to act. I was the guy signing that. But is it smart to polarize European citizens against our project? Maybe shouldn't we take it from a different perspective, knowing that actually we're losing the fight, or not? Because again, the trend is against us. So if we continue this fight, maybe we're going to end up opening a present that we don't like to open. That's the first thing. The second thing is, how can we be so sure that Europe now is a driver for voters? 2019 European elections was the first European elections, first time, that the turnout increased, coming from an absolutely negative increase in the last 6 elections. Which means that now the people is taking this as a yes or no. Yeah. And I think that's a losing situation for us. First of all, because we are fighting an asymmetric battle. It's like, maybe it's not the smartest day to use military similarities, but when you have a conventional army, how do you fight it back? You fight it back with guerrillas. They're asymmetric, and actually, most of the time, they win. You see, Russia in Afghanistan, Vietnam in the US. So we are actually fighting that fight, but we are the conventional guys. So maybe we have to start looking into how actually we find asymmetric ways of facing this thing. And for me, the most important thing is try not to use Europe as a polarizing issue for voters, because it's something that even if we win in the next years, it's going to go the other way. It's how it happens.
Yeah. Don't politicize Europe. Thank you very much. Katalin, I think a few questions very relevant also for the things that you mentioned, like democracy, education from the beginning on, but also how can you be more transparent as governments, and can you make sure that the money doesn't go into the wrong pockets, actually against your values? What's your reflection on those questions?
On these questions, but also what Adrian said, because I want to reflect a little bit and maybe argue with it. No, I agree with most of your analysis, but first, connecting what you said to what Rolin asked, I would like to talk a little bit about the responsibility of the European institutions also, and our responsibilities as European politicians when it comes to influencing them. Because Dan is a national politician, and probably he will be able to talk very much about what governments can do. I'm a European politician, and I'm extremely frustrated to see that the European Commission, that is supposed to be so-called like the government-ish function of the European Union, just acts as like a bunch of technocrats, as if it wouldn't be of their interest to let people know what they are doing, that they are just sitting around in their big offices on their piles of money and letting governments out there just to lie about them, to trash them, to dunk them to the ground. And you know, in Hungary, of course, I'm always talking about Hungary because I know it the most, but probably there are similar examples. Elsewhere, a few months ago, if you passed through the street, all you saw were like government-sponsored billboards about whatever, why Brussels is bad. In the same time, it's in a country where the medical school is built up from the European money. But my point here, in the same time, there was also a billboard campaign by the European Commission. Do you know about what? It was about chicken. They were advertising the farm-to-fork strategy. And why is it important to buy eggs from locally farmed chicken? I mean, yes, it's very important, and I'm not against that. Like, eat locally farmed chicken. But if you are under like a full-on attack about obscene lies about the Brussels gay lobby trying to infiltrate the Hungarian kindergarten and want to force our kids to have like mandatory transgender surgeries, you are not putting chicken on your billboards, but you are bringing your truth out. You know, Juncker, when he resigned, he gave this comment that his biggest regret was that his commission did not take on the fight during the Brexit campaign, when all the lies were spread about Europe. And the von der Leyen Commission is in the same boat again. And yes, I'm not saying that we should necessarily polarize the voters around Europe, but the European institutions should be very, very vocal about what they are doing and what they are not doing. That's also true for less extreme cases. We have the recovery money. It's like big joint European effort. I'm quite sure that the vast majority of the governments, nice ones and not so nice ones included, spend this money on the sides of the message that, like, I brought you money, guys. Which is, from their perspective, is obviously logical. Probably I would be doing that if I would be on government. But if I am the European Commission, I would be trying to make sure that every European citizen knows that this European money is not from the benefit of their own government, but from the benefit of 27 governments combined. That it is there because this country is part of Europe, because Europe helps them, and because Europe is a power of good. Usually people, governments just like blame everything on Europe, like the bad things and the good things they take credit for. And if the European Commission and the European Parliament does not use their communications tools better, then this polarization will tear the countries apart. And like very briefly, I want to just come into the education part. Also that, and I'm very frustrated. I'm sorry, there might be some arguments here in the room, but when I talk about education or when we discuss education in European Parliament, like the first sentence or the second is that like Europe has no competence there. Like, Europe? Yeah, okay, it's like understandable, but are we fine with that? Isn't this something that we should change? Like setting some standards maybe, trying to push the union in the direction where what we feel like to be right. We are just too bound down by laws that were made decades ago and not trying to experiment with the boundaries even a little, like, then why are we there? So I think that should be absolutely important for the democratic health of our community. Like, not to of course, Europe prescribe what kind of textbooks should be there in schools or stuff like that, but just maybe to make requirements for your kids actually know like how to vote and what their rights are. I don't think that would be like such a terrible interference in the national processes if governments would be pushed or incentivized, in a better way, incentivized to provide these very basic knowledge for the children, because as I said before, I firmly believe that a well-functioning democratic health in every European country is to the benefit of the whole community.
Thank you very much. Don Barna?
Transparency. Transparency is not effective without involvement, because the right does exist, the right to access some documents, to ask, to receive answers, does exist. But in 2018, USR had in Romania that campaign, I'm sure you heard it, without convicted people in public service, because in Romania it was necessary to have a campaign like this. But 1 million citizens signed as a citizens' initiative to change the constitutions. That issue of justice became hugely interesting for the society because the people felt they took the list, they go to the family, to their colleagues to sign, to get the necessary number of signatures. So being involved, they became interesting of a specific issue relevant for the society. Because otherwise just saying, look, you're in this moment, I have a funny example exactly from our party these days. Because the members asked, we want to see what is discussing in the national board of the party, okay, the national board of the party internally is transmitted online. There are only a few members looking. It's just the idea to have the right. But transparency as a fact is efficient if somehow the people are involved in the decision or in the process. Talking about education, do you know this and that and that? There is an old line in Romania, I think might be international, saying, with fire and love, you get used to. The new generations of Europeans are quite comfortable with the benefits and with the elements the European Union is providing to all the citizens. And they take it as a fact, as a reality. Nobody is asking, oh, come on, this is a huge thing. The free market, the freedom to travel, it's something significant. They don't remember. I remember when I was in high school, staying in a long queue in the embassy in Bucharest to get a visa. All these elements for the young generation is just as a fact. So the conclusion here is we should make the communications sexy again, to use an international license, because otherwise, the way we used to communicate is not fit any longer for the cities, for the European citizens in this moment. So it's necessary to permanently adapt to the way the new generation are discussing each other. And in 2007, Romania became member of European Union. Those years, everything it was proposed by the government, it was accepted almost without any kind of comment, is for EU. So, because the level of credibility of European Union in Romania in those years was so high that it was any kind of initiative, if it was for EU, it was for becoming a member, it was accepted. The problem is that in the last year, many governments, not only in Romania, are using the European Union as a cover, as an excuse for their own policies, saying this initiative, dear citizens, we don't want to, but those bad guys from the European Union are asking us to do this unpopular initiative. So this is one element. If institutionally European Union doesn't start to communicate and involve the citizens, the government conveniently will continue to use European Union as the best excuse for their not performance.
Kathleen, you wanted to react on this shortly?
Yes,
and then we go to the questions at the back of the room.
Wanted to quickly pick up on something what you said, because I think it's so good and I just want to underline it. You said something that we should communicate it in a way that is fit for the present. And that's like so important. You know, we just lost an election. And of course, afterwards, there is this like big reflection on like what went wrong. And I am so angry that when I was like reading through the press and also talking to my colleagues, at least like 75% of my colleagues like blamed it on the voters. And I think that's not only a Hungarian phenomenon. Like everywhere, the youth of today, they are only on TikTok, they don't read, they don't care about whatever. People do not follow the news anymore, they only watch the series. I think you hear it in your respective countries, right? It's the worst way, in my opinion, to approach this problem that people just do not care about politics anymore. Because that's true. Fewer and fewer people care about politics. And you know why? Because I think a very big part of what we do as politics is like so boring. And it is not the fault of those who are doing more interesting things with their free time. It is our job as politicians to be more interesting. And yes, if the youth are on TikTok, then we should be on TikTok too. Maybe in a way that is not so cringe that when usually middle-aged people like, I don't know, I'll go on TikTok is sometimes a little bit uncomfortable. But we have to adapt to the realities of what's out there and not to blame on the people that are like, oh yeah, you should do more. No, we should do more. And if we do not do more, there are some folks out there in the far right and in the far left who will like exactly hold their finger on their pulse. So if we cannot make liberalism and content and solutions interesting, then we will lose a lot of voters, so you are very right. I just wanted to...
We should all be on TikTok, and it actually also brings us back to the point of Adrian, that we should not just look at the other factors, but also being critical ourselves. We have to convince the voters ourselves, and if therefore we have to go to TikTok. Is there any politician here on TikTok with great... Malik, you can be the first here to...
I tried one, I have an account.
I just stick to Instagram so far, but maybe in the future it'll be in TikTok. I think we now go to the point, like we have 10 more minutes to see if we can grab 3-4 more questions. I think Sabina, the guy in the red jacket, and I see there with the back, and Sander. There are 4 questions. I saw the 4 hands. And we'll collect them first, 5. Make the questions a little bit shorter than during the previous round, then we give the opportunity to 5 people to ask the questions. Sabina.
Going straight to the question, and I understand the sentiment when you say we lost the elections and one feels reflective and self-critical. At the same time, I wonder, did you lose the elections or did Europe as well lose the elections? And talking about shared responsibility of losing elections when giving legitimacy to Orban and saying if we sanction him or if we take stauncher stand, it will only support him and so on. And look where we woke up. This does not take away from party responsibilities of the opposition and the campaign and all the nitty-gritty details of the mistakes you probably made. But also looking at the larger context, where does the European responsibility lie? Thank you.
Very good question, thanks. This one is one for Katalin. Get to that back later. First, collect a few questions. The guy in the red jacket in the back, he was raising his hand in the beginning as well.
This is going to be for me.
Hi, I want to first of all destroy my own credibility by saying I used to work for David Cameron. But this has been a learning experience. And I want to talk about numbers, as Adrian asked me to at lunch. And there's 2 countries I've polled in the recent past, one of which is Hungary, the other of which is Spain. And they relate to the question of kind of, you know, what's the size of your optimum voter coalition? Because in Hungary, we identified a kind of swing vote. We call them in our segmentation skeptical conservatives, who were rural bourgeoisie, quite liberal-minded, hated Orban. They thought he was autocratic, terrible, and really, you know, over-politicized everything. But nevertheless, they went out and voted for him, and they went out and voted for him both in 2018 and again in 2022, even though they seem like a promising bloc, particularly for a liberal party. The second group, the second other country I polled was Spain, just before Vox went in to their sort of confidence and supply in Andalusia with Ciudadanos and the PP. And I polled Ciudadanos voters. And coming out of that poll was a sense that the Ciudadanos vote, half of them hated the idea of something in which Vox was involved, and it went against everything Ciudadanos was believed in. The other half loved it. So it seemed in a sense that the liberals in Hungary hadn't quite managed to grow their coalition enough, but the liberals in Spain had grown their coalition too large, so it no longer became practical as political ideas changed. So my question is, how do we work out, you know, where the most likely stable votes come from? And maybe the Dutch have a good solution by having 2 liberal parties on slightly different sides of the political spectrum, and so maximize things that way.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the questions about the polls. There was a hand here of Sander as well, and then 2 in the front here.
Thank you very much. Sander Jansen, also from VVD. So we're talking about changing the system of democracy. I heard Dan speaking about, well, not every 4 years, but the system till now worked quite good. And we had some really bad experiences with referenda in the Netherlands with outcomes that didn't work at all, especially for Ukraine in the end. So changing the system is, I think, not the solution. I think we as politicians should learn to stop sitting in rooms like this and do what we're supposed to do, go to the voters and explain them things. On the other hand, and that's something to blame, I think, for all our governments, is that we forgot to explain to people in our country why we have free elections, why we can choose whoever we want. We forgot to do that, and they got spoiled. The voters got spoiled, everything was going okay, and we don't teach anybody anymore. When I was 18, I got educated at my school on the European Union. My 14-year-old son is with me. He doesn't even know what the European Union is, and he's on a grammar school. I mean, I don't understand why we don't do that anymore. We don't educate our youth anymore how democracy works, how the European Union works. We just take it for granted. And you can go on TikTok. It won't work. The TikTok is already gone, right?
Okay, it's not TikTok.
No, it's not
But a
TikTok
very good
anymore. It's
question. Thank you very
Discord
much. Thank you very much. We go to, sorry, I cannot take all the questions anymore. Maybe we can bring the microphone here to the front. There were 2, 3 questions, and do it very short in 2 sentences or something. Then we can give the opportunity to answer as much questions as possible. So 2 to 3 sentences, please.
I try to do it very short. Leonie van der Tol, I work for the Netherlands Court of Audit EU team. I'm a local I'm in the Alliance of her and local politicians since last March. I noticed 2 things. In December, I spoke for the Conference of Europe, and I noticed that everybody in the room there was very convinced of how important is Europe.
Very good.
When I spoke with the local citizens in the campaign, no one was aware, no one cared. Now I'm in the city council, and one of my main points is to bring Europe and the local level closer together. I think when somebody they know and they trust tells the message, it will help maybe even more than a billboard. So my question would be, or request, maybe we could work stronger and more together to reach our goals. To reach our goals.
To reach goals.
Europe and the local level closer together.
Local level, perfect. Thank you very much. Strong cooperation, thank you very much. And the last question?
My name is Dan Liesje, and I don't know if I have the answer to your question about education, but actually I want to go back to your presentation in the beginning and go back to Fukuyama, and I think part of the explanation is that we believed early in the 90s that, I mean, especially in our family, that the liberal part of democracy is solved by the end of communism, and that we can focus only on the economic liberalism, okay? And that we started to measure everything in the education based on economic outputs of our universities, and we modeled even the way we are doing the hierarchy of, for example, universities based only on economics and economic output. And that's why we are no longer, I mean, we can use math to see how many departments in European universities in humanities and social sciences disappeared. So if we are not teaching history in the schools, it's also because we changed completely the paradigm, and we shifted towards a completely economic understanding of schools and universities. So it's not the job of politicians to explain how democracy works to people. It's the job of the schools and the professors and the universities, but they are no longer incentivized to do that because they are focusing only on economics.
And what would your question be about this?
The question, I mean, and Katalin, we talked about this before. I mean, in the European Parliament, we have to push the Commission to change the way, and can we do that, to change the way we are measuring, and because we are, EU is not dealing with the education, it's not part of the job, but we are financing universities, and we are financing Erasmus. Perfect. Can we change the way we are measuring the success of universities based on their ability to build good citizens?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for keeping the questions as short as possible. I will ask for specific questions, specific panel members to react, actually. Maybe the first one, it was a very direct one, actually, from Sabina to Katalin. So I just give you the floor there to answer that question.
The first, only first?
Yeah.
Okay. It is about the European responsibility in the election results in Hungary, and no, I think it's clear that the Hungarian parties lost the election. This was our fault. We were on the ballot paper, not Ursula von der Leyen. What Europe lost in return is once again the possibility to stop the democratic backsliding. Europe lost this election from its own perspective. It lost the chance to get control of a government that just like keeps on spending European taxpayers' money on their own corrupted purposes without... okay, sorry, I got a bit confused in my own thoughts. But what Europe should have done. Is not, of course, interfering in how the Hungarian elections were conducted, or not to, like, feel their own party or anything. But what they could have done is, first of all, apply the rule of law conditionality mechanism. In the very first second, it was possible. That was last January, 1.5 years before the election, before the war. This is a mechanism that would have enabled the Commission to cut European money from the corrupted Hungarian government. They didn't do that because they didn't have the courage or the political responsibility to do so. And by not doing this, now they still have a government that spends their money, that serves as a bad example for other European governments. Hopefully it will change with the elections tomorrow, but who knows if, like, there is, Slovenia following, there are questions in Italy, questions in France, questions all over. Because if other governments see that you can be a corrupted autocrat trampling on human rights without absolutely any responsibility, maybe some of them will also get the idea that this is good. So by not showing the red line to Orban, the European Commission and the European Union failed to tackle this problem once and for all, and they just push down the road a little bit. Let's see where the ball stops. It's a loss for them as well.
Thank you. Very clear answer. I had actually two questions that I would like to ask for Barna. The first one is about, from Sander, should we as politicians not try to go out of those rooms that we are today, but go outside and convince voters ourselves, maybe combined with how can we work together more closely also when it comes to local governments and see what we can do there to convince our voters. But shouldn't we go outside instead of sitting inside here in a panel together?
It's a matter of, you said the system worked, it's okay, 4 years, we vote, we got some guys, God bless to be the good ones, it's not, that's it, that's the system. It's not enough any longer. The new generations, I call them more leftists that it was, it's the same, this is the situation in Romania, I don't know in each country what is the particularity, but the new generations are obviously different because I graduated the high school in the moment when Ceausescu fall. In 1990, I started high school, actually, I graduated school. So my generations, 10, 15 years generations around, we are all liberals because our parents was communists, was in the communist period. So for us, liberalism was the modern alternative. Now, having different kind of liberalism in Europe, for the new generations, they are looking for something different. And something different, unfortunately, it's either populism, either extremism, or both. So maybe it's not change, as you said, but we need to adapt. Adapt is giving them some voice to have the feeling that they are involved. Because in communications term, it is that book well known, what brings us here is not bring us any farther. And that's the true in terms of the way the European Union is communicating. Because then it was that question with who lost the elections in Hungary or another country. It's the liberal Hungarians lost or the EU lost. It's exactly like in any other domain. The failing is orphan and the victory has more than 100 mothers. It's the solidarity for the European project should be more vocal. And this is why what happened with Ukraine, it's a wonderful example which give us a lot of oxygen for the liberal narrative. Because Putin considered for sure the Europeans who won't be on the same page, because we know them. And amazingly for him, European was solidarity to the Ukrainian project and Ukrainians' way to survive, in fact. So it's about this, it's about the capacity in each European country where the liberal movement gets stronger and stronger to be solidary, we as European, and to apply the European mechanism, which does exist, but actually are ignored for political reason.
Thank you very much. And I think the last question we had was about the polling, actually. You gave the examples of information you had from Hungary and from Spain. So the question to both of you, Katalin and Adrian. It was also a question to the Netherlands, what polling tells us. But first to you, actually. What does it tell you? Does it give any new information, or did it change your strategy? Or were there things that you were missing? Or could it be helpful for the next elections?
Well, we need to see a lot of these polls, of course. it's kind of difficult because the situation is still a given and the electoral field is extremely gerrymandered also as we speak. I think one of the biggest problems that we saw that is also tying into what you say is that Hungarian opposition had a 6-party coalition running together. One of them was a party previously on the far-right field, Jobbik, that moved to the center. Well, after the elections, it became kind of obvious that even though the party might have moved to the center, but their voters didn't. So their voters stayed where they are at the extreme right. So we were calculating with 1 million extra voters, and these voters either voted for the Fidesz party, Orbán's party, or to the party that is even more extreme than them. So they just didn't follow us. I think partially, and this is also coming back to some of the points Dan and Adrian mentioned, what we have to learn is that people are not only pieces on a data board. We cannot add them up. We cannot multiply them or divide them. We cannot count on support for granted. So if we do not do a strong campaign, if we do not campaign on our own values, if we do not campaign from our heart, we are just hoping that hopefully these people will come with us no matter what we say. It might be a better strategy. But we're still in the process of understanding it, and I would be very interested in those numbers that you were talking about.
Thank you. Adrian?
Well, I agree with her. We have to mix both things, right? Data values ideas, but without data, with data you actually somehow reduce the margin of error. To the question that he posed, well, all central voters or centrist or moderate voters are the less loyal of all of them. You know that, as I do. But the thing is how it has changed where they go. Before they used to go either to the right or to the left. From the 17% Ciudadanos got in April 2019, we know that more than 40% went to Vox. So they jump one step. They jump the conservatives. Which means that the political electoral paradigm or where we move on the axis, it doesn't work anymore. It has changed completely. It's not left-right. It's different issues. It's polarization, but it's not left-right. Yeah. Then on this also how we are going to approach people at local level. And I don't know about you, that you say that we have to go to more to talk to the citizens. Yesterday I was 6 hours giving lectures on Europe in 2 different universities. Today I'm here. Tomorrow I'm going to be 10 hours in a stage with party affiliates. In 2 years I've been in 36 out of the 50 provinces of my country. But that's not giving me votes. And I'm telling you, the extreme right or the populist or nationalist politicians, they do far, far less, not only on the ground, but also in the institutions, as we know. So I don't say it's not important, but I'm saying that's probably not the solution. And then how to talk to them. I'm so bored of going to talk about Europe, and it's like Europe is Disneyland, you know. The European project is Disneyland, everything is fine. Maybe we have to be a little bit critic from a constructive point of view, of course. But if you continue selling this idea of Europe Disneyland to regular citizens, it's not going to go anywhere. They're not stupid. If you go to them, talk to them about roaming, Erasmus, free movement, work or love or do whatever you want to do in a different country. You know, those are the things that people get attached to. You don't have to go to their brains. You have to go to their guts. And this last thing I want to say is responding to something that Sabine said about Europe. Well, Europe doesn't run for elections, Sabine. Mm-hmm. It does not. So how people in the Commission, are they going to own their thing and go to fight against, you know, and instead putting a billboard with chicken, put a billboard saying Orban is stealing our money? They cannot. It's like imagine in my country. We have 17 regions. We are an almost federal state. During the pandemic, there was a huge fight between central government and some of the governments of the regions, that they were from a different color. Of course, the regions, they didn't agree. They were fighting against the central government, but they were two different political entities in coalition, many of them, and they were just fighting on the media. Until we don't give the Commission that kind of proper coalition stance-ship, they're not going to be able to own their decisions. It's impossible. It's just impossible. And that, for me, is the huge democratic lack that we have in Europe. Mm-hmm. Until the Commission is properly done up of a coalition of a majority, leaving people out, even commissioners from particular countries, which, of course, this is a dream, this is never going to happen. And it's obvious that it shouldn't happen, because there are 27 different member states, 27 different ways of looking at things, and this is still on the making.
Thank you. We're almost at the end of this panel. The panel was about how can we strengthen democracy in Europe and also in the nation states. And what I take away from this panel is actually what you said, the trend is against us. And it is hard work that we have to do ourselves in order to strengthen democracy. As Barna said, it's not just a pilot that we have projects where we strengthen democracy or where we discuss with citizens about the future of democracy. It's something that we really have to work on every day, whether it's strengthening the education system or going out instead of sitting in rooms and convince voters to vote for us. And sometimes there's a disappointment, as currently is in Hungary, but it is also one of the steps in order to strengthen democracy, actually, and to see how we can let the liberal voice grow. We shouldn't give up there. Thank you so much also for the interactive questions and all the questions that you posed. Sorry for not being able to take all the questions. But first, a big applause for this great panel. Thank you very much. We will be back here at 4 o'clock. Make sure that